As most of you know, the online game called Among Us has recently become very popular. If you don't know what it is, it's a game where a group of 4 to 10 players do tasks on a spaceship, but one of those players is an imposter and has to kill people. The imposter tries to kill everyone on the ship without anyone knowing it's them. The players can vote off other players one by one, guessing who the imposter is, until either everyone is killed or the imposter is found. Anyways, I'm in high school, so of course all of my friends and I have been playing it lately. One night, after taking a shower and getting ready to go to sleep, I got in my bed and opened Among Us on my phone. I chose an online game with the name Join Us or something like that. There was 6 people in the game, and I wasn't the imposter. It all seemed like a normal game until an emergency meeting was called, and I looked in the chat and saw that everyone was speaking in very cryptic sentences. I couldn't understand anything that was being said. There were normal words, but they were in orders that didn't make any logical sense. Everybody was talking a lot except for me. I thought maybe it was some sort of a glitch, and I closed out of the chat and we returned to the game. One player was voted out, but it wasn't the imposter. I played some more and then tried doing some tasks, but then I got voted out, even though I wasn't the imposter. I quit, and I was about to join another game when I got a text message notification on my phone. It was from a number that I didn't recognize. The message was a bunch of words, but in an order that didn't make any sense. Immediately, it made me think of the game that I had just been in. It was pretty creepy. I didn't know who was texting me or what was going on. I responded asking who it was that was texting me. What I got back was an image. I recognized the image. It was the last photo on my camera roll that I had taken. It was of my friend at lunch that day. Now I was officially freaked out. I didn't feel like playing Among Us anymore. I shut off my phone and tried to go to sleep. I lay there, paranoid, thinking of what could have happened. I figured it was some sort of a glitch, or maybe they were somehow hacking. Eventually, I was finally able to fall asleep. I woke up the next morning and turned on my phone to see several new texts. There were more random sentences from the same number, and then more photos. Some of the photos were different ones from my phone, but then there were some new ones. They were of me and appeared to have been taken from my phone camera the night before. I knew I hadn't taken them, and I was very freaked out. I shut off my phone again and told my mom that it was broken. We ended up going to a cell phone repair shop later that day, and I explained what happened to them. They referred me to another repair company who was able to fix my phone and told me that I had been hacked. Everything is good now, but I haven't played Among Us since. I have no idea how those hackers got into my phone through the game. I have been playing Among Us for a few weeks now. I'm 17 and I have 5 siblings, all ranging from ages 12 to 20, so we all sometimes connect on our Wi-Fi and play with just the 6 of us in our house. The other night I was in my room and my sister texted me saying they were starting a game. We would often text each other because my brother's room and my room are in the basement and the rest of the bedrooms are on the 2nd floor of our house. I responded and said that I would play, and then I joined the server. There were 6 of us in the game, but then a 7th person joined. I was a little confused because only people on our Wi-Fi network could join, but I guessed maybe one of my siblings had a friend over or something. The 7th player's username was Imposter. Very original, I know. We started playing the round, and then my brother called an emergency meeting. He asked who the guy named Imposter was and why he was on our Wi-Fi. None of us knew, so we voted him out of the game. It was a little creepy to know that there was someone else on our Wi-Fi. I didn't know how this was possible if other people could somehow get on it, but I figured maybe it was a neighbor kid or something. After all, the houses on my street were pretty close together. We finished the round and then started another one. When we did, the guy joined back in again. Once again, we voted him off, and were a little more annoyed this time, so we banned him. Shortly after this, I heard a noise from our basement storage room that was across the hall from my bedroom. I was alarmed because my brother was upstairs, and I was the only one downstairs at the time. Already a little freaked out from the game, I slowly walked towards the storage room. I went to the handle and opened it a crack. I was telling myself I was just hearing things, and we had some bikes and a lot of other junk in the room, so I figured some of them may have fallen over. But when I opened the door, I saw a skinny guy with long hair and a scruffy beard looking right back at me. I screamed and slammed the door shut and then ran upstairs as fast as I could. I yelled for my dad and slammed the door to the basement shut. I explained what happened and we called the police. We held the basement door shut with a chair in front of it and waited. The police finally arrived and the man was arrested. He seemed to have somehow snuck in our house and had been living in our storage closet for a couple of days. It really creeps me out knowing that I slept across the hall from him for a few nights. My name is Suzanne. A couple weeks ago, I was on a plane back home from a long trip. I was really bored, so I watched some movies and then downloaded a game called Among Us. It was really interesting with imposters and crewmates. Next to me was someone named Jill. We talked and became pretty good friends. She also downloaded the game and we played together on the plane. In one match, the imposters sabotaged the O2 and Jill and I fixed it. Then about 2 minutes later, the flight attendant on the plane said that there was a loss of pressure on the plane and our oxygen masks then dropped. We started to panic, but moments later we were told that everything was okay again. I said that nobody should sabotage the O2 again, but Jill said that it was just a coincidence. She ended up being the imposter in the next round, and she decided to sabotage the O2 again. Moments later, the flight attendant came back and told us all to put our masks on because we were experiencing low pressure once again. Everything ended up being alright and things were sorted out again, but I'm still very creeped out at how much of a coincidence it was. I am a 16-year-old male. After hearing the popularity and hype of Among Us, I finally downloaded it. If you don't know what it is, it's a mobile game that went viral where you have to figure out who the killer is before he kills everyone. I've been playing for around a week, so I'm decent. I was bored one night, so I joined a game. Right away I noticed something weird. All of the players were wearing witch hats. I didn't mind it, I found it weird, but let them have their fun. I saw a notification in the chat and I opened it. It said, "Join our cult or die." Again, I didn't mind it because it was a game where people had to die. I didn't know if he was being serious. More people were telling me to put the witch hat on. I really didn't want to since I like my avatar regular. I said no, I'm going to stick with what I have. Not even a minute after, a witch hat appeared on my avatar. I didn't know how this was possible, but I didn't want to keep the hat on, so I took it off. The game started, and I was hoping to be the imposter, but sadly I wasn't. I made my way down to the electrical room and did my task, but then the red avatar killed me. I was fine with it because that's the point of the game, but that wasn't the problem. All of the other witches saw him kill me. I wondered why they weren't reporting it. Then the witches started moving in a circle around my dead body, like Ring Around the Rosie. I was even more weirded out now. They eventually split off and the game ended. The next round, we were in the lobby, and one witch said in the chat, "Whoever doesn't have a hat, kill them first." Then all the other witches agreed. I still didn't put my hat on because I was kind of annoyed. The round started, and I was the imposter this time, along with a pink character. I was looking around for someone to kill when there was an emergency meeting called. Pink, who was the other imposter, was a witch and immediately said that I was the imposter. I wondered what was wrong with him. I didn't even get to kill anyone yet, and he told them. I was pretty annoyed now, and they voted me off. In ghost mode, I was following Pink, and every time he killed people, the witches were moving around the body. They did that a couple more times until the game ended. When the next round started, I was made the host. I was now able to kick them out. Usually I wouldn't kick players, but this time was different. I was so annoyed that I kicked them all out and banned them. Banning people usually means they can't rejoin, but not this time. One of them rejoined, and I asked how they were able to do it. but they didn't respond. Instead, they responded with my address, my real home address. The server then crashed and the game ended. I had no idea what was going on. I figured somehow they were hacking the game. Then I got a notification on my phone. It was not the kind of notification like a text message, but the kind of notification that pops up on your screen when your battery is running low. The notification said, "You will see us again." I pressed cancel and I was really freaked out. I didn't know how they got my address or how they were hacking the game. I was terrified, but eventually I was able to fall asleep. Around 4 a.m, I woke up. I thought I was hearing footsteps outside my bedroom. I locked my bedroom door. I already was home alone that night because my mother was out of town for work, which happened frequently. I was so creeped out that I called the police. They came over and searched the house with me. Nobody was found though. I helped them look through the house one room at a time because I was so certain that I had heard footsteps, but there was nobody in the house. When we got to the kitchen though, in the middle of the floor, there was a witch's hat lying on the ground. It was so creepy that we searched the house once again, but nobody was in there. I have no explanation for any of it. Every time I join a game now and see a player wearing a witch's hat, I have to leave immediately. When I was a senior in high school, during my last spring semester, I had taken all of the classes that I needed to take, and I had an extra hour during the day that I could use to just study. I had an entire classroom to myself for studying, but I would usually just play games on my phone. It was during my third period, so I couldn't go home early or anything like that, but it was still a nice break for me. One day, I got to my study hour and actually had some homework to do. I began working and went for about 20 minutes until I heard an announcement come over the school intercom. It was an announcement of a lockdown, and everyone was instructed to lock their doors and return to their classrooms if they were not in them. I wasn't quite sure if this was a drill or not at first, so I went over and shut the door. The classroom that I was in a wing of the school that was farthest from the locker commons and cafeteria, so I figured no teachers would come over there or hear anything. So I just went back to my homework. I will admit though, I was slightly scared, but really I thought nothing of it, because in my time at that high school, we had had 2 previous lockdowns, which were basically just false alarms. I was working on my homework when suddenly I heard a knocking at the door. I walked over to the door and saw a kid outside. I opened the door and he told me he had seen a guy in the hallway. The kid seemed to be in a panic, so I let him in the room and we locked the door. The kid explained to me that he went out for a drink of water and saw an older looking creepy guy walking towards him. The kid wasn't able to get back to his original classroom because he would have to go past the creepy guy. I turned off the lights in the classroom and we both went to the back corner. We sat there in pitch black silence for several minutes. I whispered over to the kid and asked him what his name was, but he appeared to be gone. Then there was another knocking at the door to the classroom. I was pretty scared at this point, but I slowly got up and walked over to the door. I listened on the other side and heard someone say police. I was shocked. I opened up the door to see several officers. One of them pulled me out of the room immediately. I was as confused as can be, but then I saw them go into the room and a short time later come out with the kid that I had let in. They led him away and they told me that he had been the reason for the lockdown. As it turns out, he was a former student who had graduated 2 years earlier. He had gone to the school and had made several threats against the school, but was seen by a staff member shortly after entering. It really creeped me out knowing I had been alone in a classroom with him. This story happened my senior year of high school, which was about 5 years ago now. That year, they added this new room at the back part of the school. I can't remember the exact name they used for the room, but it was basically just an area with several computers and tables, and it was used for giving students extra help with school or making up tests and things like that. It had been made out of an old abandoned classroom that wasn't used for several years. At this time, I had been out of school for 2 days with an ear infection, and in that time, I missed a math test. When I returned to the math teacher, he allowed me to make up the test during study hall, so I went to that new room to take it. The teacher, Mr. Marcus, didn't want to have to go to the room and watch me take the test, so he let me go by myself and said he trusted me not to cheat. I walked all the way over to the room, which was pretty much on the complete opposite end of the school, and once I got to the room, I sat down and began the test. It wasn't too long of a test, but it was a really important one. Right when I got to the third question, the telephone in the room started ringing. I didn't want to get up and answer it, but I figured it was probably Mr. Marcus. I walked over and picked it up. When I did, I was told we were under a lockdown and there was a suspicious person in the building. I was scared being all by myself back in this room with nobody else there, and there wasn't even a classroom next to me I could go to, because this classroom was between 2 locker rooms for the gym, which was also nearby. I did what I was instructed to do and shut the door. As I did, I decided to take a quick look out into the hallway. It was completely empty and quiet as well. I went back in and decided to turn off the lights. I went out of sight of the door and went towards the back. Then I took out my phone and used the screen to give me some light to try to do more questions of the test. However, I couldn't really focus with us being in a lockdown. Suddenly, I heard the door to the room that I was in open. It was at that moment that I remembered I hadn't locked the door. Quickly, I ducked down underneath the table that I was at. I could see just barely from under the table a small amount of light coming in from the doorway and saw boots on the ground. At least they appeared to be boots, as I couldn't really see much. I was terrified, and I held my breath so that I wouldn't make a sound. Whoever was in there stood in the doorway for a while, and then the door shut. I barely heard footsteps walking into the room. I was literally shaking, trying not to make a sound. The room then went completely silent and remained that way. I slowly breathed in and out as quietly as I could. I was expecting at any moment to feel someone grab me from behind or something like that. But then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of a computer falling off a desk to the ground. Then I heard the noise of a man yelling and screaming. It seemed as though whoever was in this room had gone into a rage and was screaming and smashing things. I opened my eyes and looked over. I still couldn't really see anything, but I could hear where all the noise was coming from, and it was at the opposite end of the classroom to my left. I was terrified and knew I needed to get out of there. The exit was directly in front of me and to the right, and the noises were directly in front of me to the left, so I figured I had to make a run for it. I took a deep breath, and then got out from under the desk and ran as fast as I could, as whoever was in there continued to seemingly destroy things in the room. I ran forward to the door and was just barely able to see where I was going. I stumbled into a chair just before the door, but I was still able to make it out. I heard the man yelling as I left the room and sprinted down the hallway. I ran all the way to the front end of the school, where I saw a police officer. I yelled where the guy was and that he was destroying things. Another officer led me out of the school. After some time, I was able to calm down and they ended up catching the man. I got to go home right after that, and I feel so lucky that I made it out of that room, because obviously whoever was in there was very dangerous. In my freshman year of high school, during the first semester, I had a civics class as my last class of the day. The school that I went to was pretty average size, I would say. I remember the class that I was in had about 20 kids in it. It was a couple of months into the school year at this point, and on this Thursday afternoon, we were all just listening to the teacher go through some announcements, when suddenly the phone in the classroom rang. The teacher, Mrs. Lindstrom, walked over and answered it. Then she hung up and told us all that the school was going under a lockdown. She seemed pretty serious and told us that this was not a drill. She locked her classroom door and then turned out the lights and instructed us to the back end of the classroom. We all got up from our desks and went to the back. There was a lot of whispering going on, but nobody seemed to know why we were under a lockdown. The longer we all sat back there, the more concerned everyone seemed to get, which made me start to worry. I started thinking of all the possibilities of what could be going on. It got really quiet after a while, and at one point we heard footsteps going down the hallway, but we didn't know whose they were. The lockdown went on for probably 30 more minutes before there was another call to the classroom announcing that the lockdown had been ended. We returned to class for the final 15 minutes or so, but the only thing on my mind was what could have caused it. School was dismissed after that, and I left school to get on my bus. When I got outside the school, I noticed several police cars with flashing lights. Everyone was talking about the lockdown, and I heard several rumors about what it was, but it wasn't until later that night where I got the real answer. My friend Robbie, whose mother worked at the school, told me that the lockdown had been caused by a student who claimed to see a strange man wandering the halls. However, after an extensive search of the school, one of the back doors was seen to be open, and it was determined that the man had left. The area was briefly searched, but the man was never found. The next day, when I went back to school, everything seemed to be pretty normal, and by the time I got to third hour, I had forgotten all about what had happened the day before. It was a Friday, so I was pretty much just excited to go to the football game that night. In the middle of my third hour class, which was history, I had to go to the bathroom. I knew the teacher was one of the nicer ones who didn't require a pass or anything, so I just asked and she allowed me to go. I walked down the halls of the bathrooms, which are towards the end. As soon as I opened the door and got inside, I came face to face with a man who I had never seen before. He was wearing a winter hat and had long black hair and a small beard. He looked really surprised to see me. We both stood there staring at each other for a second or two. Then the man came towards me and I turned and ran. I ran back to class. When I got back, I told my teacher what I had seen, and the school once again went on another lockdown. This time we stayed locked down for over an hour. I was terrified, but finally it ended, and afterwards everyone was allowed to go home early. They told us the man had finally been caught, but what I don't understand is how they didn't find him the first time the school was locked down, and what he was doing inside there in the first place. I live in Virginia, pretty close to where the Appalachian Trail is. I've walked on the trail several times before, but there are also a lot of other trails nearby where I live, as the land is very unique. There are lots of mountains and woods, and my apartment is right by them. For a stretch of time a couple of years ago, I would often jog on the trails at my place. I would go almost every day. Basically, from the apartment complex, there was already a trail that connected from it and would go a ways down, and then connected with a bunch of other trails that went in the woods. These trails went for miles, some of which connected to parks and such. Most of the time, they would be pretty quiet, but occasionally a decent amount of people would use them. For example, if it was really nice weather on a weekend, there might be a good amount of traffic on the trails. But just based on my work schedule and my personal preferences, I would typically jog on these trails really early in the morning. Normally, I would go there at about 5 a.m., and I would jog for maybe about an hour or so. Most of the time when I jogged, I would have my headphones in and listen to music. There would also typically be nobody else on the trails at that hour, as it would still be dark outside. And this is something that sort of made me a little nervous at first, but I quickly got used to it. I would jog maybe 5 miles on these various trails for roughly an hour, and then head back to my apartment. So one morning, I was jogging on the trails like usual. It was very early and still dark out, and I was heading back, but still maybe a mile from my apartment. As I was in the woods jogging on the trail, my headphones died. I had forgotten to charge them, and so as I was running, I took them out. I continued to jog, now listening to the silence of my surroundings. The only noises that I heard were occasional birds chirping in the distance, or leaves from the trees lightly blowing in the wind. About 5 minutes into the silent jogging, I heard something else. I started to hear footsteps behind me a ways. This instantly was strange because I hadn't seen anybody else in my times jogging in the morning, basically ever. As I continued jogging, I heard the footsteps jogging a ways back. I didn't look at that point, but I had to figure that they were between 50 and 100 feet away. Where had they been before that I had not heard them? After jogging for a bit longer, I just decided to look and see who was there. When I turned and looked behind me, I saw someone a long ways back, but they instantly ducked into the woods. This was really suspicious. I couldn't tell anything about them because it was dark out and they were a long ways away, But why jump into the thick forest? This made me really suspicious now, and I started to jog faster back towards my apartment. I was getting a lot closer to it now, but still had a ways to go. After some time, I heard the person running on the trail again behind me. I just wanted to get out of there as quick as possible. I was now pretty close, and I basically started sprinting. A short time later, I made it to another trail and then took a left to go back home. After running down that path for a short time, I came out of the woods and was basically back. I still heard the footsteps until I left the woods, then I stopped hearing them. I didn't look back again until I was almost at my building. By that point, I didn't see anyone. Whoever had been there was gone. I think they stayed in the woods. I was able to get inside and was safe. I wasn't sure exactly what happened there, but it was really strange. A few days went by, and I soon forgot about what had happened mostly. So without really thinking much, I got up early again and decided to go for another jog. I went outside and entered the woods. It was at that point when I remembered the events of my previous time. I thought about going back inside, but I convinced myself to keep going. I told myself there was probably just a one-time thing, and maybe there was an honest explanation anyways, so I started jogging. But I decided to keep my eyes out for anything suspicious, and also jog with only one headphone in. So about 20 minutes or so into jogging that morning, I was in the woods on the path by myself. However, all of a sudden, I suddenly saw something off the trail to my right in the woods. There was what looked like a man, and he was kind of crouched behind a tree and was looking at me. He was wearing camouflage, it looked like, and it was a miracle that I even saw him, because he was hidden pretty good. I started to pass him, but then instantly stopped and turned around to go back. It was kind of just a reaction, as I didn't really give it too much thought. The man didn't move. I then began jogging back towards my apartment. Not long after, I heard movement just in the woods behind me, and then footsteps on the path. Then I heard some jogging. I knew that it was the same guy, so I started jogging faster. I could run for a long time without getting tired from all my experience, which is an advantage that I had. I continued to hear the jogging a long ways back again, but I didn't look behind me. I just hoped that he wouldn't get any closer. Eventually, I made it to the other trail and then went out of the woods again. Once more, the man did not leave the woods. I looked back and he was still there. I got back to my apartment and then didn't go jogging on that trail in the dark again. I've been back in that woods to do some jogging or walking since then, but not as much, and when I do, I go during daylight. Other than that, I do most of my jogging on the treadmill now. I'm not sure what that man's plans were or what explanation there could possibly be for his behavior, but it was really suspicious. I work at a Walmart that is located in Pennsylvania, and I've worked here for several years. One time, I had a pretty crazy encounter that I will never forget. So, I was working as a cashier, and I was working until 10 o'clock that night. At one point during my shift, a man came into my checkout line. I don't remember what he bought, but it wasn't much. The man looked fairly average to me. He had glasses, a bit of a beard, and was wearing a hat. As he was standing across from me, we made some basic conversation as people do at the checkout line. The man then asked me if I could take him to the Appalachian Trail. Now, the Walmart that I work at is located not too far away from it, and it's maybe a 10-minute drive or less. I don't know exactly how to get there, but I knew the basic direction, and some roads that you would go on to get there, so I told the guy what I knew. He then said, "No, can you take me to the Appalachian Trail?" He was sort of smiling when he said it, so I couldn't really tell if he was joking or not, but I just assumed that he must have been, because it was kind of a weird question. I mean, why would he ask me to take him there? I told him, "I have like 4 more hours of work. I'm not off until 10. The man said, "Okay, then I will wait for you," and he kind of smiled when he said it. I wasn't quite sure if he was joking or not, but it seemed like he probably was, so I said, "Okay then, sounds good," and I kind of laughed as I said it. Of course, I was joking. The man then walked off and left. I continued on with work, thinking nothing of the interaction. I continued with work at the checkouts for the next few hours. That interaction with the man happened at probably like 6 p.m. or so I did have about 4 more hours of work. I continued on, and then at 10 o'clock, I was finally off. So I clocked out and then left the Walmart to walk to my car, which was parked at the back of the parking lot. After I got out the doors, I saw this guy kind of standing around near the exits just loitering. I didn't think much of it for the first couple of seconds because people do that, but then I recognized the guy as the man who I had talked to earlier. He quickly saw me and then started walking over. I couldn't believe that he was still here 4 hours later. I had said I would take him to the Appalachian Trail, but I was joking. I mean, who takes that literally? The man approached and then said that I was finally done and I could drive him now. I told him that I wasn't actually serious and I thought that he had been joking. The man said that he had waited all this time for me and that he didn't have a car. I was conflicted. I actually felt kind of bad if that was in fact the case, but that also made me even more creeped out by the guy. I started walking to my car and the guy began walking with me. I asked him why he needed a ride to the Appalachian Trail. I mean, it was 10 o'clock at night, way too late to be doing any hiking. The man said that he was visiting town and really wanted to check it out. I told him that it was probably closed, and he said that didn't matter. I stopped and told the guy, "Look, sorry, but I don't know you. I just don't like giving rides to people that I don't know." The man said that he would then follow me in his car. I know he told me earlier that he didn't have a car, but I didn't question him. The compromise seemed good enough to me. I just didn't want the guy in my car. I'm not sure if he didn't have phone directions or what. I was done asking him questions. I said, "All right, I will drive to the Appalachian Trail and you can follow me." So I went to my car and he went and got in his. I put in directions because I wasn't even completely sure myself how to get there. It was less than a 10-minute drive, so we left and the guy followed me. It was really quiet at that hour and it was just our two cars on the quiet roads. So I made it to the trail in a small parking lot. I parked and the man parked next to me. He got out of his car and I rolled down my window to say bye to him. The man walked quickly right up to my window and said thanks, but then he told me that he needed me to get out and show him where the trail started. I pointed off in the direction and told him. I was also very curious as to why he was here so late at night, but he said no, I had to get out and show him. This was far too sketchy, and I said no, I have to go now. The man tried opening my door handle, which thank God was locked. I then instinctively hit the gas to back up and leave. The guy basically started chasing after my car. I was able to get away from him though, and I quickly left and began driving back home. I thought that the man might go back to his car and try following me, so I started turning at a bunch of random roads. Then I drove the rest of the way back home and thankfully didn't see the guy. I'm not sure if he came after me in his car or not, but it was crazy. Why did he want to go to the Appalachian Trail, and why did he want me to go there so badly? A few years ago, I took a trip to the Appalachian Trail with my best friend Paige. We were on a road trip, and we had gone on a road trip to another part of the country the previous year. It's always a lot of fun to travel and see the different cool places. We were planning to do a good amount of hiking. We went to the trail and walked for hours. On this particular day, we did not see anybody else on the trail the entire time. It was peaceful and quiet, and we both really enjoyed the hike. However, I remember that after being out for hours, we finally got back to the car. It was parked in a small lot that had maybe 10 or 15 parking spaces in it total. But yet there was a car that was parked directly next to ours. It was an old beat-up car that was kind of small, and it had blankets over some of the windows. I found this really odd, because there were plenty of other spaces. We both went to our car and got inside, and in doing so, realized that somebody was in the driver's seat of the car next to us. A man sat behind the wheel, but I just started our car and we began to drive off. That's when the man started his car, which had a really loud engine, and then he started driving behind us. Instantly, we were suspicious. I mean, what were we supposed to think? When we got out onto the road, the man continued to follow. So we decided to try to drive to a busy place to maybe lose him. We got off that quiet road, went to another one, and soon we found this spot that was a busier part of the city. There was much more traffic and a bunch of businesses, things like stores and restaurants. We drove there with the guy still following, but here it was definitely more difficult for him to do so. We turned into a few random businesses and went down some roads nearby. The man was able to mostly keep up with us until we got to this four-way stop. It was kind of busy with cars coming in all directions. We went straight, and the guy behind us had to wait for the other cars to cross the road. But as soon as we got across, we turned again and went behind this store. We then drove back there and turned again, and had completely lost the guy because he had been held up in traffic. We were both very alarmed by the situation, but we were glad to now be on our way without being followed. We continued back to the hotel at that point. After getting back, we were hanging out in our room and it was nighttime. A few hours later, Paige noticed out the window that the car was in the parking lot. I went out to the window to look, and she was right. The same car was in the parking lot. We had a good view as our room was on the 4th floor, so we could see many cars in the lot. Had he been following us still after we thought we had lost him? We kept watching his car, and it sort of looked like he was inside of it, but we couldn't tell for certain. I just hoped that he wasn't staying at the hotel with us. The next morning, we had to check out of the hotel and leave. But the guy was still there, and when we looked now in daylight from our room, it appeared as though he was inside of it. We waited for a while, and then decided to leave.
We packed up our stuff and went to the front desk. However, before leaving, we told the employee at the front desk about the guy in his car and mentioned how he had followed us. The man at the desk said he would go and check on the man to see what he was doing. He walked out there, but before he even got to the guy's window, the man drove away. So after that, we carefully left. Thankfully, we didn't see the man for the rest of the trip, but that was really creepy. I lived in Appalachia for about a year for work. It was cool to live in a small house by myself not too far from the Appalachian Trail. The landscape over there is much different than what I'm used to and what I grew up with. Lots of hills and trees, and it would get really foggy a lot where I was. It looked kind of spooky sometimes, and I had heard some scary stories, but overall nothing creepy ever happened and I enjoyed it. Until one night. In the house that I was renting, it was a quiet neighborhood, and it had a front and backyard. A little ways past my backyard, there was a trail that went to a wooded area. I always meant to check it out and go jogging or walking there sometime. However, for like the first 6 months or so, I never got around to it. Finally, one evening, it had already just gotten dark out, but I found myself out in the backyard. I think I had just taken out the trash or something, so I was already outside. I was just curious and decided to go walk over to the trail, just to see what the path was looking like. I didn't have intentions to go for a walk or go far on that night, but maybe if it looked good, I would go the next morning. So I walked out past my yard and got to the trail. Now, I remember I was told when I got the place that anybody could use the trail and that it was not private property or anything. So I entered it and took a few steps down. It was really dark now, and it had no lighting on the trail, but it looked like it was a pretty good trail for walking or whatever. It was mostly surrounded by woods. I got maybe 20 feet down the trail and was just standing there looking around. Then I heard a sound. Someone said, "Hey." It was like they were greeting me, saying hi, but I couldn't tell where they were. Maybe in the woods? I looked around at all angles, but couldn't figure it out. Then they said it again. It was sort of quiet, but it sounded like a man. I answered and said, "Hi, who's there?" Nobody answered. After a few seconds, they said, "Hey," again. I was creeped out now, so I turned around and just walked out of there rather quickly and to my backyard. I went all the way back to my house and went inside. Something about that just seemed really creepy. I mean, where was the person? Who were they? And why did they not answer me? I know they could hear me. And it seemed as though they were in the middle of the woods. I thought that maybe I would still go walking on the trail the following morning. However, that night I was awoken at 2 o'clock in the morning. The first thing I heard was somebody knocking at my front door. I got up and left my bedroom and went to a window to look out. I saw that there was someone there. It looked like a man, but I couldn't see many details. It was really dark and he was wearing a black rain jacket with a hood. He knocked again. I wasn't going to answer. He then walked off and I saw him go around my house. He then walked through my backyard and off towards the woods. Could that be the same person? Needless to say, I didn't go walking on that trail in the woods the next morning, or ever. Nothing like that ever happened again in my time living there, though. This happened 2 years ago. I was driving down the road near the Appalachian Trail. I live not too far away, and I work in the area as well. In fact, I was driving home from work late one night. It was a quiet and sort of winding road that I was on. There were literally no other cars out at all, as it was nearly midnight. It was a relaxing drive until I came upon what looked like a car that was parked in the middle of the road up ahead. The car was in my lane, and it was completely stopped. The road I was on was just 2 lanes, one for each direction of traffic, and there was a very small shoulder, and then it was just grass and the woods, so there really wasn't a whole lot of space. But there was enough space for the car to have pulled over and be off the road if he wanted to. So as I approached the car, I slowed down significantly. I was confused because the car did have its brake lights on, so it appeared to be running. However, it did not have its hazards on, and it was completely blocking my lane. As I was now going slow, I approached it even closer, and I figured that I would go into the other lane to pass it. Whoever was driving the car was still inside of it. As I turned to the left and began to change lanes, the car then moved and started going forward, but it immediately turned to the left and was now starting to block the lane that I was driving to. I slowed down even more and then came to a stop, probably about 20 yards away. At first, I thought maybe the person driving the car was trying to get out of my way, but they had just gone in the wrong direction. But then the car just stopped, now about halfway in one lane and halfway in the other, and nearly completely sideways. I was thinking that this person must be one of the worst drivers ever. I had not enough space to go around them in either lane now, so I waited, but they didn't move. I could see the driver a little bit now. It was a man who looked over at me, but he didn't really have any expression on his face, although I couldn't see him very well. After sitting there for probably 30 seconds, I decided to proceed forward and to still try to go around him to the left. I could just barely make it if I went partly on the small shoulder. When I went forward though, he once more moved. This time he went forward more, now completely blocking my path again. Now I thought that he might be trying to purposely block me. But why? I backed up and tried to go around him the other way, and then he backed up. This angered me, but I also got suspicious and a little bit creeped out. I honked and wondered if he would let me get by, but he just stopped his car there, completely blocking me. I rolled down my window and shouted at him, asking what he was doing. I know that he had to have heard me, as it was a really quiet night, but he didn't respond at all. He said nothing and still didn't move. I tried one last effort to go around, but he then backed up more and blocked my way again. So I figured that I had better leave and find a different way. So I backed up more, made a U-turn, and then went the other way. I had to take a longer route home, but eventually made it there maybe 10 minutes later than I would have. Since then, nothing like that has happened over there. But I still wonder what that man's intentions were. Why was he blocking me? Was he hoping that I would get out of the car? I'm not sure, but I'm just glad I didn't stick around to find out. I grew up in the backwoods of Appalachia. My family lived on a 5-acre plot of land, and more than half of the property was covered by dense forest that expanded past our property line for miles. My entire childhood was spent in those woods with my brother, climbing trees and catching frogs in the ponds. It was everything 2 boys could ask for. One late summer night, when my twin and I were about 8 years old, I heard someone screaming outside far off in the woods. I was the only one to hear it because I had my window open. It scared me to my core. I've heard screams before, but they were from coyotes. This was different. I went to my brother's room and opened the window to see if he could hear it as well. Sure enough, he did. Not wanting to bother our parents, we decided not to say anything. After about a week of these screams, we decided to tell our parents. Our parents told us it was probably coyotes and there was nothing to be afraid of. The screams every day sounded like they were getting closer to our house though, and then outdoor toys went missing. I wasn't able to find my skateboard I left outside one night. My brother's bike was taken, and our favorite pool inflatables were gone. We told our parents again about the screams and about our toys now being gone. Of course, they said that the screams were coyotes and that our stuff went missing because we didn't take care of them and probably got lost. The screams were getting so loud though and sounding so close that I stopped sleeping with my window open. But there was one night that I could hear yelling that sounded closer than ever before. I peered out the window, and what I saw sent shivers down my spine and paralyzed me with fear. Just outside my second-floor bedroom window that looked over the backyard into the edge of the woods, I saw the figure of a slender person. Even from my window, I could see the moonlight reflecting off the whites of their eyes, large and bulging out of the sockets. The eyes fixed on the house, unmoving. It was a man who stood a foot taller than the tall wooden fence that separated the backyard from the trees. His gaze slowly shifted towards my window. He caught sight of me, and he slowly made his way across the fence to the gate. He got close enough for me to see his face clearly now. His mouth was wide open with an expression of surprise on his face because of just how much his eyes bulged from his sockets. He had a head decorated with tufts of hair. Most of his scalp was bare, as it seemed as though his hair had been pulled out. His clothes were tattered and dirty, and he wasn't wearing any shoes. He stepped right under my window and stared up at me. I'm not sure how long we stared at each other. It felt like minutes. I was frozen in fear until a blood-curdling scream came from the face that was still unmoving and unblinking. That broke hold of my body, and I jumped back from the window and ran straight to my brother's room. He had heard it as well, and we busted into our parents' room screaming and crying. They assumed I had had a bad nightmare and scared my brother. No matter how much I pleaded, they still wouldn't believe me. The last week of summer was the worst of them all. The man with the bulging eyes would stare at me from the tree line at night. Every once in a while I would see him during the day, but every time I yelled for someone to come over, he would disappear. When school started up, I was relieved to not be home all the time. It was a stressful time. I started hearing and seeing the man less. I started to think that maybe it was my imagination that created this image and that my parents might have been right. However, one late Tuesday night, there was a knock at the front door. My father answered the door and greeted a cop. The cop explained that the neighbors called 911 on someone breaking into their pool house. The officer told my father that the man had been living in the woods for a few months, and that if anything went missing over the summer, then it might have been found at the camp the intruder had set up. I went to the back door to catch a glimpse of the man that broke into the neighbor's property. When I got close enough to the cop's car window to peer inside, a face slowly inched closer to the other side of the glass. The eyes were bright white and bulging, mouth ajar, and tufts of hair became visible. It was the screaming man from the summer. I was glad that I didn't have to worry about him anymore, but with his hideout being in the woods where my brother and I played, I wondered how many times we had been out near this strange man without knowing it. I've worked on the railroad for quite some time now. This story happened when I was working on the 150-mile line between Nashville and Chattanooga in Tennessee, right on the edge of the Appalachian Mountains. I was working a local job on that run called the Cohen Pusher. We would sit in our shop with our locomotive, and when a train needed help, we would attach to the back end to help them. With the mountain grade starting at Cohen and basically going all the way to Chattanooga, it would be a difficult stretch of railroad. I had the third shift, so it would always be dark out when I was working. We basically just sat in the shop and waited to be called to help heavy tonnage trains get to Sherwood, Tennessee. On one night at 11:50 p.m., a heavy freight train stopped over at Sherwood and requested our help to get to the other side of the mountain. We climbed into our locomotive and were on our way. By the time we hit South Cohen and started curving up the foot of the mountain, we had no visibility of anything that wasn't illuminated by the locomotive light. We had a 30-minute ride ahead of us, along with a 2-mile-long dark tunnel in our path. As the clock struck midnight, we were now in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a dark forest filled with animals, but very few mountain folk lived out there. About 10 minutes later, the north portal of the tunnel was in sight. A bridge overhung the entrance, a track that was taken up long ago as it crossed going to another part of the mountains, but the bridge stayed and was still accessible by ATV. As I looked up, I saw a campfire and people. They all looked to be dressed darkly, maybe even in masks. All I could see was white on their faces. As we started under the bridge, we heard a thud over our heads on the locomotive roof. We proceeded through the dark tunnel and slowed just out of the south portal as my conductor looked out the back door with his flashlight. He saw nothing, so we shrugged our shoulders and proceeded to the last 10 minutes to our waiting train. It was 12:20 a.m. as we coupled onto the rear of the train to push it from Sherwood. As the engineer on the head end entered the south portal of the tunnel, he radioed back to me talking about figures standing over the tunnel entrance. However, no one was there as it came to my side. As we left the north portal, I looked to the best I could see on my side of the tracks for whatever had hit our roof. I saw what looked like a black cloak fluttering in the wind as we passed by, but I couldn't really tell. As we entered Cohen, we uncoupled on the fly, and the train continued to Nashville. We cruised into our parking track and tied our engines down. As we got off, we had the feeling of being watched, but thought nothing of it as we parked ourselves in our office chairs. We had no more work for the rest of our shift. We talked and napped on and off until about 3 a.m. We never did shake the feelings of being watched, so we stepped outside as I put a pinch of dip in my lip and my conductor lit a cigarette. As we talked with each other, we both noticed movement in the brush across the tracks. My conductor and I are big country boys who aren't scared easily. We went over to investigate. We found 3 hooded men in the bushes. I asked them, "What do you guys think you're doing here? You understand you're trespassing on railroad property, right?" The lead guy then spoke in a very gravelly tone and said, "We just want what's ours." As he said this, he motioned to the top of the locomotive. We looked to see a young man on the roof at the air horn. The young man was in nothing except underwear, and we all looked at him, and then he bolted off the roof and climbed off down to the tracks. As this happened, the figures went to chase. The lead guy then turned his head back towards us with glowing eyes that we could now see, and he gave chase along with his friends. We called the police. After hours of investigation, they found the man's underwear, but no traces of him or the cloaked individuals. We even took them up the mountain on train, but there was nothing. Now, on occasion, we find mutilated dead animals by the shop door or locomotive. I've even found 1 or 2 at my door at home. We still occasionally see the same fire on the bridge and get the feeling of being watched, but it's all gone by the time we return. There's for sure some kind of cult somewhere in that mountain, and I hope that we never run into them again while we're working. It was August a few years before COVID, and I was 15 at the time. My mom lived in a cute town in the North Carolina mountains, and it was deep in southern Appalachia. My parents had been separated for a few years, and I spent the summers alone with my mom in the mountains. My mom is physically disabled, and while she's perfectly self-sufficient, Groundskeeping and outdoor yard work was not a possibility for her, so I was there to help. It was a nice neighborhood, and there were neighbors close to us on either side, and a domestic road right in front of our house. We still lived in a rural area, but there was at least other people around us. This story starts when my mom was complaining about hearing scraping on the sides of the house at night. I went outside with my friend next door and we examined the problem. Parts of the paneling of the house had clearly been ripped off. There are tons of animals in Appalachia which could have done that, but we still wanted to know. My friend had an extra doorbell camera that kind of captures motion. We set it up on my mom's window right above where the paneling had been torn off. That way we could see what size animal we were dealing with, and if the animal might be hurt and need intervention from a nearby wildlife service. So a few days went by, and sure enough, I got a buzz on my phone in the middle of the night. It was the camera outside capturing motion, so I opened the app to look. It was a big bear. I couldn't see details because it was mostly from an upwards view, but I knew it was a large animal, so this needed wildlife involvement. I could see its whole body, and it looked sick. It had patches of bald spots and a really shallow face. It was scary at first, but then I was sad when I realized that the bear needed help. The next day I sent the video to my friend, showed my mom, and we called animal control. This is pretty usual for my area as there's a strong presence for wildlife rehab. A wildlife rehab officer came to our house and came inside to get the full details. He planned to trap and release the bear, which meant hopefully they would be able to check on the bear to see if it was okay and it didn't have any communicable diseases. So we talked and I showed him the video. I showed the officer the video of the bear, and I had never seen someone's face go white before. He then calmly said, "Ma'am, I think you need to call the police, because a bear's legs don't bend that way." The wildlife rehab officer said that he had never seen a creature like that before and advised us to call the cops. After we did call the police, they said there's nothing we can do unless it comes back and we can catch it. A big trap was set, but the animal never came back or was smart enough to sense a trap. This gave my mom and I a jolt of fear, and she ended up moving away a few months later anyways. I grew up in southern Tennessee, not far from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. When I was 17, I took a girl I'd been seeing up a mountain trail at dusk. It wasn't a big planned trip. We just wanted somewhere quiet to talk and be alone. The trailhead was miles from the nearest house, and by the time we got out there, the light was already starting to fade. We parked in a small gravel pull-off. Right behind the car, I stepped straight into a mud puddle. It soaked right through my shoe. I remember looking down and noticing that the water wasn't a normal dark brown. It was lighter. It was almost a tan, watered-down clay color. I nudged her and pointed it out. "That's weird," I said. She shrugged. "Probably just the dirt up here." We found the trail we wanted and started walking. We got a few hundred yards up, and the woods were quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. After a while, she grabbed my arm and said that she didn't like how the woods felt and wanted to go back to the car. We turned around and headed to the car. Once we were inside, the mood shifted. We were teenagers, alone on a mountain at dusk. It didn't take long before we stretched across the front seat and started kissing. She had her hand hanging out the open passenger's window, just resting there. That's when I felt it. It's hard to explain, but I'd felt it before. A tight, prickling feeling across my back, like when someone is standing behind you and you haven't seen them yet. I froze for a second. "Pull your hand in," I told her. She laughed. "Why?" "Just do it." She rolled her eyes but pulled inside the vehicle. I tried to shake it off, and we went back to what we were doing. A few minutes later, the feeling came back stronger this time. My shoulders tensed without me meaning to, and I reached over and rolled her window up. She asked me why I rolled it up, and I responded that I didn't know, but something was just off. However, we kept going. Then it hit me again, only this time it felt like someone had pressed a live wire between my shoulder blades. I shot upright so fast I hit my head on the roof. I started the car and pulled out of there and onto the road without another word. Gravel launched out from under the tires as we headed back down the mountain. She asked what was wrong, and the only thing I could do was respond with, "I don't know." I told her that something was wrong somewhere. I didn't know what I meant by that, I just knew I had to leave. We drove straight to my parents' house. I ran inside and checked that everyone was there and doing good. Everyone was fine, and my mom asked me why I looked pale. I told her I didn't know, and I just had a bad feeling. After a while, I calmed down. We had dinner with my family. I started to feel stupid, like I'd scared both of us over nothing. When we went back outside to my car so that I could drive her home, I opened the passenger's door for her like normal. Then I walked around the back of the car to get in my side. That's when I saw it. On the trunk near the left taillight was a handprint. It was light brown, the same color as the mud puddle. The handprints were very clear, and the fingers seemed abnormally long for a human. The handprints moved across the trunk and up over the back window. The last print was smeared near the top edge, as if whoever had made it had been leaning in, trying to see through the glass. They were heading towards the driver's side door, towards me. It felt like lightning ran through my body. I knew then what that feeling I had had on my back had been. I wasn't imagining it. Someone or something had been behind the car. We sat there for a while examining the handprints, trying to make sense of it and come up with a logical explanation. But it was the exact same weird color from the puddle, which makes me believe it happened when we were parked up on that mountain. The strange feelings I had on my back made me think that the handprints were placed while we were in the car as well. Working on the railroad, I traveled through a lot of lonesome places, including the Appalachian Mountains. There's an area just south of Nashville in Tennessee that I've passed through before, and around that area there's a legend that my coworkers always bring up when we pass through. The story is that at night around midnight you can see the light of an old-school swinging lantern with a headless corpse carrying it, walking down the tracks. The corpse of a man who was once a conductor who was decapitated after falling off a moving train. I was on a two-man crew where we would be passing through the tracks near that town. We rolled into the town at about 11:50 p.m., and out of nowhere we went into an emergency. My conductor went to walk the train to check it out, leaving me alone in the cab. After about 10 minutes, all lights went out and then came back on, and I saw a figure standing on the tracks in front of our stopped train. Thinking it was my conductor, I left my seat and went out of the cab door to see what was wrong. I got on the ground and saw nobody around anywhere. I was freaked out at this point, so I just got back on the locomotive and sat down. At this point, I looked in my rearview mirrors and saw a figure moving on my second unit behind me. I radioed to my conductor asking where he was, just to hear that he was 30 cars back from me still. I walked to the second unit to find nothing. At this point, I was frustrated and creeped out, and basically stranded in this nowhere town on a stretch of tracks in the Appalachian Mountains. I went back to the lead locomotive and a few minutes passed. I felt like I was being watched, so I turned to the left to see a corpse with no head rising out of the conductor's seat coming at me. I was frozen with fear at this point. Right as it got within a few feet of me, it just disappeared. I saw a lantern swinging, moving away from my train. My conductor happened to see it on his way back and asked me why I was outside with my lantern. I explained to him what happened as we got back on our way. It was by far the creepiest thing that happened to me on the job. This story takes place back when I was in college. I attended a large university that was a couple of hours from where I'm from. I had lived in the dorms with my roommate Rachel the previous year. The two of us decided to rent a small college house together for that upcoming school year. We were able to find a place that was cheap that we could afford, but it didn't come with any furniture, so we had to get some. Mostly we would look on Craigslist for either free or really cheap furniture. After getting the lease for the house in June, we got a couple of things over the summer. At one point, close to the start of the school year, I still needed a desk and was looking around Craigslist. I found one that I really liked, and it was also really cheap. So I reached out to the seller via text and let them know that I was interested. The seller responded, asking me several questions which I found odd. He asked for my name, age, and why I wanted to buy the desk, and he made it clear that his price was not negotiable. I figured that he was just super organized or something, and I had no interest in negotiating either. I mean, the desk was like $20, so it was already a good deal. I texted him the information, and he texted back saying that his name was John Smith, which also seemed odd. I mean, that kind of seems like a fake name to me. Anyways, he said that I could come by and buy the desk the following evening between 7 and 9 o'clock. He also said that he would help me bring the desk to my car. It was a pretty large desk, and I had cleared out the back of my SUV for furniture I got. I told John Smith that I would just bring my roommate and it would be fine. He said no, not to bring her, and that it was no problem for him to help. This seemed strange to me as well, which only made me want to bring Rachel with even more. So I told her about it, and she agreed that it seemed sketchy. I should have just forgot the whole thing and not got the desk, but it was a really nice desk and I wanted to get it. I was young and dumb and I felt that nothing would go wrong. So the following evening we drove to the address that was provided. We got there shortly after 7 o'clock and it was a fairly average looking neighborhood. It was maybe 10 minutes from campus and was pretty quiet, with many houses that had fairly large yards. I texted the owner, John Smith, that I was there. He told me to go inside the house and that the couch was inside. Rachel stayed in the car and I told her that if I needed her help I would let her know. I walked up to the front door and knocked. John Smith opened it and told me to come in. He appeared to be in his 60s, had a mustache and a sloppy looking beard, and smelled like cigarettes and beer. I walked inside the house and was inside of the living room. I did not see the desk there, and John Smith informed me that it was in the basement. This made me want to leave immediately. If he knew he was selling it, why would he not at least bring it upstairs? I was annoyed but said okay. He claimed that he was sorry and that he just forgot to bring it upstairs. He said that he also needed help bringing it up the stairs. So against my better judgment, I followed him over to the basement door. He opened it and it revealed a staircase going down to an unfinished basement. It was really dark down there with not much light at all. This only made me more nervous. The man started walking down the stairs and I followed him. Down in the unfinished basement there were some boxes and junk scattered around, but overall not too many things. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, we then walked a little ways into the basement. I looked around and finally I spotted the desk that I was buying. It was completely backed against a corner of the basement far away. This was odd because the listing for the desk showed it being in a room with natural light. I remembered that, so it had to have been upstairs. The man then started walking away. Not towards the desk though, but towards the stairs. He then started to walk up them. I was confused and also really nervous. As the man was making it to the top of the stairs, I didn't know what was going on. And just then, I heard a sudden knocking from the front door of the house. It had to be Rachel. The man stopped on the stairs and looked back at me, and in an angry tone asked, "Who is that?" I was speechless in the moment, and without me even answering, the man quickly turned back and walked up the rest of the stairs and left the basement. I followed and quickly went up the stairs and made my way to the main floor. When we both got back upstairs, the man walked over to the front door. I was trying to quickly go over there as well. Sure enough, Rachel was standing there at the door. She was still knocking on it and knocking rather loudly. The man opened up the door and angrily asked her who she was and what she wanted. Without letting her respond, he told her to leave. Rachel said she was my roommate and I walked over and went past the guy. He angrily yelled at me and said that I was supposed to come alone. I didn't want to argue with the guy or anything. I just quickly walked past him and Rachel and I then ran through the guy's yard and back to the car. He was yelling and cursing at us the whole time. Then we left and drove back home. By the time we returned, the Craigslist listing was deleted. I still made a report to Craigslist about him though. I'm guessing that John Smith was not his real name, but I do have his address. I never heard anything more, so I don't know if anything was done about him. I guess technically he didn't commit any crime, but it was sure as sketchy as can be. The fact that he wanted me to come alone was a major red flag. I should have never gone there, and I'm glad that Rachel came to the door when she did. She told me that she just had a bad feeling about it and it seemed to be taking a long time, so she decided to just knock on the door and see how it was going. But when nobody answered the door for a while, she started loudly knocking. Thankfully, it worked.
My name is Abby, and several years ago, I matched with this guy on a dating app. I had been on a few dates with guys from apps here and there. Some were alright and some were not, but nothing really crazy had ever happened. So I matched with this one guy whose name was Sebastian. In his pictures, he appeared tall, had dark hair, and after matching, he reached out to me. We started talking, and within a few days, he suggested that we go on a date. I was feeling good about things, so I agreed. However, I did not feel like I really knew Sebastian that well at all yet, but I figured that it would be a good chance to get to know him a lot better. Sebastian suggested a pretty fancy restaurant, and I was somewhat surprised. I didn't know if he was really rich or trying to impress me or something. I remember mentioning how the place was really fancy, and he said that was good. Before the date, he offered to pick me up, and I said no thanks. I figured he was just trying to be nice. So I drove to the restaurant and met him there. We sat down in the very nice restaurant and started talking. Sebastian overall seemed nice for the most part. However, some things just seemed a little bit strange about him.
He looked just like his pictures, so he was no catfish, but it was more of his personality that for some reason seemed a little off. I didn't know exactly what it was at first. I remember though a couple of times he asked me where I lived. The first time I told him in the city, and then I asked him where he lived, and that was just normal conversation. He asked me where in that city, and I told him a little more specific area, but still pretty basic. And then he asked me what street I lived on, which I found kind of odd, and I'm not sure why, but I told him. I lived in an apartment building at the time, so that wasn't giving away exactly where I lived. The conversation changed after that when we talked about different stuff. A while later though, he asked me if I lived in an apartment. I don't remember how exactly the conversation shifted to that. I said yes and told him the name of the complex that I lived in. However, he then asked me what my apartment number was. By now, I found this very odd. I asked him why he wanted to know that, and I jokingly asked him if he was going to send me flowers or try to break into my place. He laughed about it, and then I kind of changed the subject without giving up my room number. There were a few other things he said in conversation that were a little odd, and I can't remember specifics now, but I just remember that the longer we talked, the more I had a strange feeling about him. I tried to look past it though and just enjoy the date at the nice restaurant. We were there for well over an hour. When we were finally going to leave, Sebastian offered to give me a ride home. I told him that I drove there myself, so I didn't need one. He said that he would walk me out to my car instead. I said that was okay, so we walked out to the parking lot, hugged, and then went our separate ways. I got into my car and drove back home to my apartment. After getting back, I didn't really know what to make of Sebastian, but overall, I did not want to go on another date with him. I went to bed that night, only to wake up a short time later to the sound of somebody knocking on my apartment door. I didn't know who it could be. The knocking was sort of constant, but not that loud. I got up and walked out of my bedroom and over to the front door. The knocking had sort of stopped by then. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. Whoever it was appeared to have left. I almost opened the door and looked in the hallway, but decided not to. So I started to walk back to my bedroom to go back to sleep, as I was not even 100% awake yet. But on my way back to my bedroom, I heard another knock. This was very strange, and I walked back over to the door and looked through the peephole again, only to see nobody there once more. I was really confused at this point and didn't know what to make of this. So I just kept looking through the peephole. I'm not sure why, but I kept looking for like over a minute straight. Then, as I was still looking, I saw a man suddenly come into view, and surprisingly, it appeared to be Sebastian. He quickly knocked on my door again, and then even faster went to the side of the door going out of my sight. I was extremely creeped out by him now. I wasn't sure what to do, but I certainly was not answering the door. Somehow, Sebastian knew where I lived. I stood there by my door for a minute or so. I just wanted him to go away. Then he knocked again. That's when I figured I should do something. I yelled loudly, "I called the police, Sebastian." Not long after this, I thought I heard footsteps walking away. I didn't hear any more knocking for at least 5 minutes, and at that point I decided to look in the hallway. I very carefully opened my door just a crack. The hallway appeared empty. I looked around and he was nowhere in sight. It seemed as though I finally got him to leave. Then I reported Sebastian to the dating app and then blocked him everywhere. And since then, I have not seen or heard from him. I don't live in that apartment anymore either. I still don't know exactly how he knew which apartment was mine. Obviously, I had told him where I lived as far as the apartment building, but I never gave him my room number. I also didn't notice being followed home by him or anything. The only thing I can think of is maybe somehow he did follow me home, but he must have been very sneaky. Or else he got to my apartment and asked somebody if they knew where I lived maybe. Either way, that was by far my craziest experience with a dating app. This happened back when I was in high school. It had to be either my freshman or sophomore year, because those were the only 2 years that I rode the bus. School started at 7:45 a.m., but the bus would come by my stop to pick me up at 6:30. Well, it was supposed to be 6:30, but the bus would often show up at more like 6:50 or even 7. To get to the bus stop, I would walk down my street to the end of it. Then the bus would stop there and I would get on. I was the only kid at that particular stop who rode the bus, and there weren't any other stops in the immediate area. It was a pretty quiet area because in my neighborhood, the yards were a little bigger and the houses farther apart. There was less traffic on the roads as well, especially at those hours. Across the street from the bus stop were some woods and houses spread out pretty far. So one morning, I walked down my street to the end where the bus stop was. I got there at about 6:30, but figured I would probably be waiting for a good 10 or 20 minutes like normal. I'm not sure why the bus was always so late, because my stop was only the third one of the morning. Every now and then the bus would show up perfectly on time though, so you could never depend on it to be late. So I stood out there in the dark because the sun hadn't come up yet. It was very quiet and there were no other cars on the roads at all. I waited and waited. I was pretty tired from having to get up so early like I often was in high school. Then I noticed headlights in the distance. I figured that it had to be my bus. When it came closer, I noticed that it was in fact a bus, but not mine. It looked different. It slowed down when it got closer to me. Then I noticed that this was not the typical bus. My bus was the normal standard yellow school bus, but this one was like a really light yellow, almost white. It was slightly shorter than usual and looked older and more beat up. Now, in the past, one time we had a different bus for whatever reason, and I had a substitute bus driver once as well, so I thought that maybe that was the case. But when that happened, the bus had actually looked newer and in better shape. Something about this just gave me a bad feeling. The bus slowed down even more, and then came to a stop right across the street from me for me to get on. I did not cross the street. I started to get a bad feeling like I should not get on the bus. I looked and could see the driver. It was not the usual bus driver that we had. This guy had a dark gray and also part black beard. He was wearing a hat as well and looked over at me. I just kept standing there. Then he waved at me to get on the bus. I almost went. I think I might have even took a step, but I thought better of it. I stayed where I was and then waved for the bus to go forward without me. It did not. The bus driver had the door open and he shouted for me to get on. I looked in the windows and could see that there appeared to not be any other kids on the bus at all. Normally there would be 3 other kids on the bus at that point, as I was the third stop and one of the stops before me had 2 kids in it, so this was just really weird. I said no and then turned around and started to walk away. I was going back towards my house, and then something unexpected happened. As I was walking back down my street, I heard the bus turn onto my street behind me. I looked back and it was indeed going onto my street, something that had never happened before. At that point, I started to run. That's when the bus stopped. I then heard the beeping as it backed up and then turned around and went back onto the busier road in the direction that it had come from. I was so confused. I stopped and then went back to the bus stop feeling really creeped out now. That bus was nowhere in sight anymore as it had drove away. I stood there in silence wondering what had just happened. I was glad that I didn't get on that bus though. I figured that if it was somehow the bus I was supposed to be on, I could tell my mom that I missed it and she would drive me to school. That's something that happened a few times before, and even though it took my mom out of the way to get to her job, she could still do it. I stood there at the bus stop and the time approached 6:50. Then I saw more headlights. Another bus drove down the street. I thought at first that it was the same bus coming back, but it wasn't. This was actually my correct bus, the same one as usual. I saw a few students on already, and the bus stopped for me. I crossed the street and got on. It was the normal bus driver and students. I don't think I was ever so happy to see them before. I got on the bus, went to my seat, and then rode the bus to school, wondering what would have happened had I got on that other bus. I never saw that other bus again. To this day, I wonder who it was driving it and why he drove to my stop. Was it something innocent, like a substitute bus driver who just got lost or got his route mixed up or something? Or was it something terrible, like a kidnapper trying to pose as a bus driver? I'm not sure, but I'm so glad that I listened to my instincts and didn't get on that bus. For a little background, when I was a young woman about 10 years ago, I worked at a Walmart for a few months. I worked as a cashier and was just 20 years old, working during the summer when I was back home from college. The Walmart was not far from where I lived, and they were always hiring with it being a large store and whatnot. So after getting the job, things went well for a while. Then, one time, this man came to my checkout. He looked young, but probably a few years older than me. Overall, I would not say that he was ugly, but I will say that he was not very attractive. When he was at my checkout, I was scanning his items that he was buying, and he told me that I was beautiful. I was happy to get a compliment and told him thanks. He then asked me what my Instagram was. I don't know why, but for some reason, I gave it to him. Looking back, I could have just said that I didn't have one or that I didn't want to give it out. But I told him it, and he took out his phone right then and there, which I didn't expect. He typed it in, found my profile, and then followed me and showed me that he did. It seemed a little bit strange, but I just played it off and said thanks. He then asked me if I had a boyfriend. I told him no, but I'm not really looking for anything at all right now. He said that he understood, and I felt a little better. There was an awkward silence, and I quickly finished scanning his items. I saw him looking at his phone, and I realized that he was on my Instagram page still. Quickly enough though, he paid, and I told him to have a nice day. When he left, he said bye, and I thought that I would not see him again. But I was wrong. Literally the next day, the guy sent me a message on Instagram. He said hi, and I did respond to him saying hi back. He started a conversation with me, and I didn't know what to think about it. Pretty quickly though, he asked to hang out, and I said no. He continued to message me, so I just ignored him. To that point, he had not done anything that creepy yet. I'm not going to make a guy seem like a creep just for shooting his shot with me. But after that is when things got real bad. He started messaging me almost non-stop. When I stopped replying, he just continued sending me messages. I was so tired of seeing the notifications. In 2 days, he sent me over 30 messages. Most of them were just saying stuff like, hey, or why aren't you responding? Finally, I sent him one final message, saying that I was sorry but I didn't want to hang out or talk with him anymore and to please leave me alone. He did not though. He just kept sending me even more messages. So at that point, I blocked him. But this didn't stop the young man. He made another fake Instagram account and started messaging me there. It didn't take long for me to realize that it was the same guy, so I blocked that account as well. He didn't message me after that. But a few days later, I got word from some of my friends that he was messaging them on Instagram. Apparently, he saw who some of my friends were through my Instagram page, so he followed a few of them and then started asking them questions about me. He claimed that he was a good friend of mine, and so a few of them contacted me about it because he seemed strange. I was angry and told my friends to block him and that he wouldn't leave me alone. After this, I thought the whole ordeal was finally over. Except, one night during the next week, I was working another shift at Walmart. As I was at my checkout, I was kept pretty busy for most of the time. But at one point when things quieted down, I looked around and observed the same man there. He was sitting down on a bench closer to the exit doors. He was just sitting there and watching me. When I noticed him, he didn't wave or anything. He just stared intently. It was really creepy, and I looked away at once. I tried to distract myself, and soon enough, some more customers came into my check lane. But when I looked back and he was still there, I had enough. I left my check lane and found my boss, who I told about the whole situation. He said that he would go talk to the guy. Now, I don't know what my boss was planning to say or do. I'm not sure if he had the authority to kick the guy out of the store or anything. I guess he did if he was a manager, but as soon as my boss walked over and approached the man, the guy quickly got up and left. They didn't even have a conversation. I was glad to see him gone and hoped that he would not come back. I worked the rest of my shift and it went well. I got off sometime that night at maybe 9 or 10 o'clock. However, after clocking out, I left the store and started walking through the parking lot to my car. It was very quiet now. I saw one guy kind of walking around the lot. I realized it was the same guy. He was not standing by my car, but I hoped that he wouldn't notice me. I turned and started walking to another row of cars closer to mine. But then he did notice me. I saw him start walking in my direction. I bolted for my car and ran there. I was able to make it, but the guy reached the car right after I did. I went inside and locked the doors, and he started knocking on my window. I didn't waste any time and just drove away. After that, I actually called my boss and told him about the guy to make him aware of the situation. Because if this were to continue, I would not feel safe coming to work anymore. Thankfully, I was off for a few days. When I returned to work, I was told that the guy was banned from the Walmart. Apparently, he showed up again, I guess to look for me, but he didn't buy anything and just walked around. Based on him following me to my car, the manager trespassed him from the store. I think that was enough for him to finally leave me alone once and for all, because I never saw him again after that. I only worked at the Walmart for about another month though. Looking back, it was a pretty creepy experience.
I used to work at a Blockbuster video store back in the day. I think that I worked there for about 1.5 years, and I was able to work my way up to manager. One night, I was by myself towards the end of the shift. It was a quiet night, and I was closing. At my store, it closed at 9 p.m., and for the last hour or so, we didn't really get any customers. So as far as I was aware, the store was completely empty besides me. When 9 p.m. was approaching, I went around to make sure nobody was there and straighten up a few things. However, when I got towards the back end of the store, I heard a noise. It was the sound of somebody walking, and I realized that I wasn't alone. It was strange because I hadn't heard or seen anyone in the longest time. Whoever was in here must have almost had to be hiding or something. I called out asking who was there, but I got no response. I said that we were closing soon, but there was still nothing. The footsteps were not that far away, and whoever was in here was just a few aisles out of my sight. I walked closer. I looked around but still couldn't see anything. I could hear them walking away like they were trying to move away from me. After walking faster and going around a corner, I finally saw for a split second a woman go around another corner away from me. She was wearing a winter coat and hat and had dark hair. I called out to her asking what she was doing, but she still didn't answer me. The woman had a slightly disheveled appearance. I stopped hearing her move around, so I kept walking up and down each aisle. Eventually, I spotted her. She was hiding behind a DVD display. When I saw her, she got up and ran to another aisle. I was so confused and wondered if something was wrong with the woman or if she was crazy. I asked her if she was all right, but she still didn't answer. It was very weird. She didn't seem to enjoy running around, like she wasn't smiling or laughing as if it was a game. It was like she was very seriously trying to run away from me. I told her again loudly that we were closing and she would have to leave. Of course, she still didn't answer me. As confused as I was, I went back over to the counter where I worked to finish up some things. I didn't know what I was going to do about the woman hiding in the store, but it was like 8:58 at that point. Then, when I was facing the other direction, I heard the doors to the store open. I looked over and just barely saw the woman walking out. I was glad that she was gone. Very quickly, I walked over to the doors and locked them. Then I was able to do a few tasks before leaving. I left the store at probably 9:05 or so. The parking lot was very quiet, and I walked out to my car, which was the only one there. Right when I got inside, I heard footsteps approaching me. I looked and saw the same woman walking in my direction, but she looked a little different now. Her hair had looked sort of messy before, and her hat had been crooked. Now she looked very neat. Her hair was perfectly in place, and her hat was neatly on her head. She also had a more friendly look on her face. I rolled my window down, and the woman said hi to me. She then very politely asked me for a ride. I was so confused, and she mentioned nothing about why she had been running around the store hiding from me. It almost seemed like a different woman, but no, this was definitely the same person. Remembering her past behavior, I told her no, I could not give her a ride. The woman asked if I was sure, still being polite, and I said yes. Then she said okay, and I put my window back up. She started to walk away towards the back of my car. When she did though, she suddenly reached for my door handle really fast and tried opening the back door to the car. It was thankfully locked. After finding out she was locked, she loudly banged on it twice and appeared to kick at my door. I then hit the gas and drove away. I left the woman standing in the parking lot looking at me as I drove off. I have no idea why she did the things that she did. My best guess is drugs. She acted so different and normal when she was talking to me though. I luckily never saw her again in my time working at Blockbuster.
One night, I was home alone watching a movie on TV. I'd been flipping through the channels until I found something interesting, like I often do. I live by myself in an apartment, and it's a pretty average place for the most part. As it got to be late at night, I was starting to get tired. Out of nowhere, randomly, there was a knock on my apartment front door. At first, I thought that it was one of my neighbors complaining about the noise. The volume of the movie on my TV was pretty loud, to be honest. So I quickly turned it down and then got up from the couch and walked over to the front door. Before opening the door, I looked through the peephole. I saw a young woman standing there. She looked to be in her 20s, had dark hair and a few tattoos on her arms. I didn't recognize her, but then again, I didn't know most of my neighbors. Thinking she was still a neighbor, I opened the door. Before she said anything, I said, "Sorry, I didn't realize I had the volume so loud." In my mind, I was 100% sure that she was complaining about the noise because I had no idea what on earth else a neighbor would be at my door for. She looked confused for a moment and then said, "No, that's fine." Then she told me that she was in an awkward situation. She said her boyfriend had accidentally backed into my car in the parking lot. Her boyfriend was apparently over at the car and didn't want to leave the scene, so she came in to tell me. I parked my car in the same spot every day in the parking lot, and it was out there and our lot was sort of small. Things would get crowded with cars. so I was sort of annoyed by this, but was also glad that the woman was telling me about it and they didn't just drive away. I told her 1 second I would go and get my phone, and she said okay. I needed my phone for insurance stuff and to take pictures of the damage. I quickly went back into my apartment, and my phone was still on the couch in the living room. When I got it, I was now at the back end of my apartment and near my balcony. There was a large window, and from there you could see most of the parking lot and sort of the area where I parked. I was curious, so I went over and looked out of the window. I saw the parking lot, and it seemed completely quiet. When I looked to where my car was, I could just barely see it, but I could in fact see it, and it appeared to be just fine. There was nobody standing around it and no car right next to it or anything. I couldn't see any damage. Suddenly, this whole thing seemed really sketchy. I went back to the door and opened it again. The woman was still there. I asked her how much damage there was to the car. She said it was pretty bad and we better go to the car now. There definitely was not a lot of damage on my car. I told her that she must be mistaken. She mentioned my full name and asked if that was me. I said yes, and then she confirmed that yes, it was my car that had been hit. I was confused. I explained to her that I just saw my car out the window and it didn't look like there was any damage on it at all. She looked at me but did not say anything. Then the woman just turned and walked away without saying a word. She was quickly gone. I went back inside my apartment. Then I looked out the window again towards the parking lot. Things were really quiet there for a minute or two, but I continued watching. I saw the same woman as well as a man come into my view. Both of them walked into a random car which was not even close to mine and then quickly drove away. I was really creeped out by the whole thing. I had never seen that woman before in my life prior to that night. I couldn't help but feel that she was trying to set me up. She was with a guy, and maybe they were going to try to rob me or something. I'm really glad that I didn't follow her. But how did she know which car was mine? Or how did she know my name? That part is something that I still don't know. This happened a few months ago. I was hanging out at my girlfriend's apartment one night and I ended up staying kind of late. This happened all the time, but it wasn't a big deal because I only lived a few miles away. It was just under a 10-minute drive to get back to my place. By now, as you could imagine, the roads were very quiet. So that's how I noticed that I might be getting followed not long into the drive. I didn't know for sure, but I just remembered that a car was behind me, and when I turned at one road, it did the same thing. I don't remember exactly when it started to follow me, and after the first turn, I thought nothing of it. The way back to my apartment, though, was not a straight shot, and I had to turn a few times. For the next 3 turns, the car did the same as me. I just found this odd, and we were basically the only 2 cars on the entire road. The closer we got, the more I wondered if I was being followed. Of course, with it being late at night, I was probably just feeling slightly paranoid. I didn't actually seriously believe that I was being followed, but I was curious. Then I came to a stoplight. There was a red upcoming at an intersection. To that point, I had not been able to see who was behind the wheel of the car behind me because it was too dark. When I got to the intersection, there was a bit more light there. I looked back in my mirror and I saw who was driving. The guy looked like a clown. His face was painted and his hair appeared dyed red. He also had a red nose on. It wasn't a funny clown though, it just looked creepy. This was a bit unsettling because it was nowhere near Halloween time or anything. I didn't know why some guy would be out driving late at night looking like a clown. When the light turned green, I kept going with the clown still following me. We made another turn and I was a little bit more nervous. Soon we were approaching my apartment complex. It is several buildings with a large parking lot sort of in the middle. As I pulled into the lot, the clown did too. That's when I realized that I could not just park and try to go inside. So I kept going through the parking lot and then turned out at the next area. When I did this, the clown did not turn out of the parking lot, but kept going farther into it. I let out a sigh of relief. I got back onto the road, and I guessed that it was just a big coincidence, and for some reason somebody who lived at my apartment complex was dressed as a clown. They also happened to drive home right behind me the entire way. It was weird, but I figured I'd drive down a ways, come back, and then go inside. So I went to the end of that quiet street, then made a U-turn and headed back to the apartment complex. I made it back about 2 or 3 minutes after the clown would have arrived. I parked my car on the opposite end of the lot to where I had seen the clown going. He was nowhere in sight now, but there were a lot of cars there. After getting out of my car, I began walking for my apartment building. But that's when I saw the guy again. The clown was now walking on a sidewalk near the front of one of the buildings. When I saw him, I started to walk faster to get to my building. But when the clown saw me, it was like he was after me right away. He changed directions and was now headed for where I was. We were still a long distance away from each other though. I hightailed it for the side door of my apartment building. As soon as I started moving, I saw the clown start to run after me. This caused me to run as well. I went as fast as I could, and thankfully I was able to reach the door. I quickly went inside and made sure that the door shut behind me. Then I ran up the stairs to my floor. I didn't hear the door opening behind me, so I'm assuming that the clown did not get in. Then I went to my apartment and was finally home. I didn't get any knocks on my door or have anything strange happen, and since then I haven't seen that crazy clown. I wonder who it was though, and why the guy followed me. Did he know who I was, or was I just a random target? Obviously, I wouldn't probably recognize the guy if I saw him, unless of course he was dressed as a clown again. I'm hoping that nothing like that happens again. Last year I went shopping at a really large mall. It was a weekend, so it was very crowded and tons of other people were there. In some areas it was hard to even walk through the walkways because it was so crowded. I was there for a few hours and did a decent amount of shopping. However, in the time that I was there, I was pickpocketed. At least, I'm like 90% sure that I was. I would always keep my wallet just inside of my back pocket, which was a terrible habit. Habits are hard to break though, but I obviously don't do that anymore. So anyways, I just know that when I left the mall, I realized that I did not have my wallet anymore. And despite me keeping it in a bad spot, it had never fallen out before when I sat down or anything. After realizing that I didn't have it, I quickly canceled my credit cards. Then I looked everywhere that I could think to look. There was really no use though. Surely somebody would have picked it up. And even if nobody did, it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. I was disappointed, but luckily I didn't have much cash in the wallet and nobody had used my cards yet. I thought that I would never get it back, and so when I was home, I started ordering new credit cards. I also looked into getting a new driver's license. I was pretty disappointed, but what could I do about it now? However, late that night, I got a text from a random number I did not recognize. The text said, "Meet me tomorrow night at 11 p.m. and bring $100 cash to get wallet back." It also had an address which turned out to be a park near the city a ways away. I texted back asking who this was and where they had got my wallet. They didn't respond though. I wasn't sure what I should do. Had they stolen my wallet or found it? I was pretty sure that they had stolen it. I considered getting the police involved, but I figured that I couldn't prove that this person stole it and not just found it. The fact that they wanted me to bring $100 really made me mad though. After thinking about it, I decided that I would go and meet with them at the park. But I told my friend Marty about it, and he agreed to go with me to get my wallet at the park. I didn't know what to expect, but being asked to meet at 11 o'clock at night in a park sure seemed sketchy. I really wanted to get my wallet back though. So the next night we drove to the park and got there at around 11. I had never been to that park before. It was a parking lot off a quiet road surrounded by woods. Then there were a few trails, but it was super dark out now. When I arrived, nobody else was in the parking lot. Marty and I sat in the car waiting. At 11 p.m. sharp, I got another text from the number. It said, "Exit your vehicle and take the left path for a quarter mile." This seemed even more sketchy to me. For some reason though, I got out of the car. I just really wanted my wallet back. I had the $100 cash and Marty stayed in the car. So I began walking down the path to the left. It was literally pitch dark and I could barely see anything. I made it about 100 yards down the trail when I felt my phone vibrating. It was not another text from the number though, but it was a call from Marty. I picked it up. I heard Marty telling me to get back to the car now. Then I heard off in the distance tons of honking coming from a car horn. I also heard a car driving. I turned around and ran back to the parking lot. By the time I got there, I just barely saw an SUV driving off down the quiet road. I saw Marty in the car waving me over, still parked in the same spot. I quickly went back inside the car. Marty explained to me what had happened. He said that when I was a ways down the path, this SUV pulled into the parking lot. He saw at least 3 guys in it, and he claimed that he was sure he saw one of them brandishing a gun. They pulled up and parked a few spaces away. Marty figured that I was in trouble to get jumped, or maybe worse, so he started honking the car horn like crazy. This actually scared them off. I figured they thought Marty was me, and seeing how he was still in the car and making a bunch of noise, they wouldn't be able to rob him. If Marty had not been there, these guys would have ambushed me alone on the dark trail. Now, I know a lot of people will say that I'm stupid. Why would anybody meet a random person alone in a park at 11 p.m. on a random trail in the woods? And you're right, it was stupid, and I deserve all the crap that I get for it. But I was much younger, and I've certainly learned from the experience. At least I had the thought to bring a friend, which ended up saving me. Hopefully this can teach anybody listening to always be prepared in any situation. For almost a year, I worked at a Subway restaurant in my local town. I was able to become a manager there, and the town that I lived in was pretty small, so I often worked by myself. I was able to open or close the store if I needed to, and we usually wouldn't be that busy. It's more of a rural area, so other than weekends or the early evening, it was never that busy. One night, I was working a closing shift by myself. For the last few hours, it was dead, and we barely had any customers. When we closed, I did some cleaning and final tasks, locked up, and then left for the night. I got to my car, which I had parked kind of far away in the parking lot. You see, the parking lot to the Subway is connected with this other parking lot. That was for an office building, and it sort of went around a corner. As I sat in my car reading some texts before leaving, I could still see the Subway sort of. I noticed a man walk up to the doors and try to open them. I wasn't quite sure where this man had come from because no other cars were around, but after trying to open the doors, the man did not leave. He just kept standing there, and I could see that he was looking inside now. I decided to go let him know that we were closed, so I started my car and then I began driving towards the man through the parking lot. I remember that as I was doing this, he looked over at me and then started to walk away from the Subway. I drove a little bit closer, stopped, and rolled down my window. I said that the Subway was closed and told him the time that we closed at. He just said okay and then continued walking off. Then I drove away and went home. So the next night I was working the exact same shift. I was by myself closing again, and it was a pretty similar night to the previous one. We didn't get very many customers, and then I closed up and left like usual. This time though, after leaving, I was low on fuel, so I went over to the gas station that was nearby. The station was about a half-mile down the road, but in the opposite direction from where I had to go to get home. So I went back there and filled my tank. Then I was back on the quiet road going home again. There wasn't really anybody else out on the roads at this hour. This road happened to go right by my work of Subway again. When I drove past, I looked over, probably because I worked there. However, when I did, I saw that there was a man standing next to one of the windows. This wasn't something that was that easy to see if you were just driving by, but I was able to notice him. It was a side window that he was at, and the man was standing in the grass, so it looked really strange. I wasn't sure what was going on, so I slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. When I did, I had a little bit better view of the guy, and he looked just like the man from the night before. This was really strange. After stopping on the side of the road for less than 10 seconds, the man turned around and looked over at me. That's when I saw him turn back around and start jogging away from the Subway. Pretty soon, he was out of my sight. After him running away like that, I realized that he was probably going to try to break in. I stayed where I was for a minute or so longer, and then I drove away. When I did though, I called the police non-emergency number and alerted them about it. It was very suspicious if nothing else. The next day, the Subway was fine and had not been broken into or anything, and for the next few times that I worked at night, I didn't encounter the man or anything strange at all. But like 2 weeks after this, I saw on the internet a news story that a Subway across town had been broken into. I don't know, but I'm guessing that maybe it was the same guy. Maybe he just changed locations after I kept foiling his plans. Who knows, but I'm glad that he didn't break into the Subway that I worked at. I was about 16 at the time, living at home deep in the mountains at my family's home. I frequently walked in the woods surrounding my home, but never really went that far out, either out of lack of curiosity or simply because I was lazy. One evening, I decided to take a flashlight and walk as far as I comfortably could into the valley behind my property. There are many deer, bears, and other animals near where I live, so I also brought some bear spray with me. I was about 25 minutes, maybe more, into my walk when I started to get an uneasy feeling like I was incredibly vulnerable or that I wasn't alone. I shrugged it off because I probably wasn't alone. I mean, there's a lot of wildlife in the forest, so it's not like I can just expect to be alone. I neared the creek that flowed around the property and I noticed some garbage. There were some pots and pans next to the water, as well as what looked like a tattered sleeping bag and some shoes. I didn't think much of it and I continued my walk, thinking about it every now and then and wondering if somebody was camping out near our house. It was almost completely dark by now, so I turned around and began to walk home. I kept glancing over my shoulder back towards the creek, worried that somebody might be behind me. About 5 or 6 minutes of walking in the pitch black, and I heard some branches snap a little ways behind me. My blood ran cold, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I turned around and spent a minute just shining my flashlight in every direction, wondering if a deer or even a bear was following me. Once I felt sure that nothing was there, I kept on walking. Not even a minute later, I heard running footsteps trampling behind me. I didn't even turn to look and see what it was or who was there. I just began running as fast as I could. I'm pretty sure I called out, pleading with whatever it was or whoever it was to stop. I desperately sprinted through the trees, trying to keep my flashlight pointed forward so I didn't trip or fall. I kept hearing footsteps stomping behind me and branches being snapped off the trees violently. I heard pained grunting and what sounded like someone violently growling. I began crying out of fear. I heard one loud growl or scream right behind me as whatever it was seemed to have fallen or slipped up, and I kept sprinting and never dared to look back. I eventually stopped hearing the running behind me. Once I made it to my property line, I saw the light of the house in the distance ahead of me, and I turned to see if I was still being followed. What I saw still torments me even now. A freakishly tall man standing about 100 yards away from me with my flashlight barely illuminating him. He was wearing what looked like a tattered hoodie and no pants. I stood there for a moment, struck with fear, waiting to see if he would move. As I was about to turn away and run the last stretch to my house, he started sprinting viciously towards me. By vicious, I mean he was almost on all fours, using the trees to propel himself further, grabbing at the ground, lunging towards me. I let out a scream and ducked under my fence and sprinted as fast as I could back to my house. By the time I got there, I was completely out of breath, my throat hurt, and my knees were sore. I shined the light back towards the woods and saw the man at my fence waving at me, his tall, slender figure towering above the fence. I quickly made my way inside and locked all the doors. I woke my dad up and told him what happened. I don't remember exactly what he did about it, if he called the cops or just let it be, but I don't think anyone else ever saw the guy again. I still never go out into the woods alone or any time near dark, and I certainly stay away from the creek. I don't know if he's still out there. Hopefully he packed up the camp, which I assumed was his, and moved on. I was driving late at night with a friend on a little road in the middle of nowhere in the country. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning. We were surrounded by woods and fields and the typical landscape when you're in the country. After a tight corner in the middle of a forest, we saw a lady on the side of the road a few feet in front of us. Immediately my friend, who was the driver, slowed down the car to see if she needed help. Personally, as we were approaching this person, I started to feel uncomfortable. I told my friend, and he said, "Nah, don't worry, I will just ask her if everything is okay." When we stopped the car, she looked at us and said that her car had a dead battery and she needed some help. She was in her 40s, maybe 50s, with long gray hair which looked really dirty. At this point, I was wondering how this situation was possible. We were talking with a totally random woman in the middle of the night in the middle of a forest. In hindsight, it seemed completely weird and dangerous, but at that moment, my friend was totally fine with the situation. It was a mix of his conscience and kindness, I think. As I was thinking about the situation, the woman continued to speak and said that her car was on a forest road just to the right of the main road. She showed us a tiny muddy path which was going deep into the woods. I looked at my friend and he looked at me, raised his shoulder and told the woman, "Okay, you can walk in front of the car, we will follow you." She smiled at us and said, "Thanks, you're really nice, I wasn't expecting people like you." She started to walk and we followed her slowly. As we were going deeper into the woods, we started to become more nervous. We weren't able to see the road behind us anymore. My friend started to realize that it was maybe a mistake. During this whole time, I was trying to explain to him how creepy this situation was. Finally, we arrived at the entrance of a clearing. That's when things started to become really creepy. First, there was no car, but an abandoned house with the roof completely destroyed and 2 caravans. It looked like a gypsy camp or some other type of travel group. Secondly, the woman started to run to the caravans and disappeared behind them. At this point, it was clear it was some kind of ambush or foul play. My friend immediately went back in reverse. As we were leaving as fast as the road was permitting it, the woman reappeared and ran to our car. She wasn't saying anything, just running. My friend accelerated in reverse, and we managed to make it back to the main road and leave very quickly. We immediately went to the police station a few dozen miles away. When we told them our story, they said we weren't the first. It appeared it was a caravan of weirdos who were living out there, trying to lure away drivers by asking for help. All the people in the area knew them, so they were aware of them, and it was a very remote road, and there weren't a lot of strangers passing by. I'm not sure what was going on in that clearing, but I hope the police shut it down, or the caravans moved on before they got any other out-of-towners to fall for their trick. I used to go to Chuck E. Cheese sometimes when I was a kid, and I always enjoyed it. I would play the arcade games and eat the pizza that they had, which was really good. Several of my friends had birthday parties there, and I had one once as well. But my scariest experience happened one time when I went there with my best friend David. I was 7 years old, but I remember it like it was last week. I just remember that we were there on, I believe, a Saturday morning, and we got a bunch of coins and started playing all the arcade games. David's mom took us there, and I was going to David's house to hang out afterwards. After playing arcade games and winning tickets for a while, I remember that I was standing not too far away from the playground area. There was a spot that was basically like a play place that you would see at a McDonald's or Burger King. It was a slide with some monkey bars and tunnels and stuff that you could crawl through. I glanced over and I saw a kid looking through the window of one of the elevated tunnels leading to a slide. He was just staring at me really intensely. The kid was maybe a couple of years older than me, and I didn't recognize him. I even looked around wondering if he was staring at me or somebody else, but he was definitely staring right at me, and it was really weird. I looked away and then I moved to another area out of view of the kid. After that, I pretty much forgot about it and moved on to some other game. Maybe like an hour later though, I was still in the arcade with David. I remember that I noticed the kid that was staring at me again. He was staring at me once more with the wide eyes and intense stare. I was sure that he was trying to scare me or prank me and was joking around, but it was still really weird. He was standing really far away this time and basically on the complete other end of the arcade. Once more, I decided to just walk away. I went to another area and played a different game there. I thought the kid was pretty strange that was staring at me, but I just did my best to forget about it, and pretty quickly I was able to. We stayed at the Chuck E. Cheese for maybe another hour or two, I'm not sure exactly. Then David's mom took us back to David's house, which was not that far away from the Chuck E. Cheese. When we got back, David and I mostly hung out in his living room. I'm pretty sure that we just played video games and some other stuff around the house. The next thing I really remember though was at nighttime. My mom was going to come and pick me up pretty soon, but in the meantime, I was in the living room with David, which was at the front of the house. I remember that I looked out of David's front window into the street. By now it was dark out, and I saw what appeared to be the same kid from Chuck E. Cheese standing in the street. He was staring at me once again with wide eyes like before. It was the creepiest thing I had ever seen. David saw him as well, and we both quickly covered the windows with the shades. After that, we didn't look back out of the windows until my mom was there. When I left, I did not see the kid anymore, so he must have gone. I remember telling my mom about it, but she didn't seem too concerned. I think she thought I was exaggerating, or she just didn't think it was that weird. But I still think it was really weird to this day. I'm not sure if the kid was one of David's neighbors. David didn't seem to recognize him. I guess it's still possible though, and to me, that's the only thing that makes sense. Overall, I still don't know why the kid would stare at me like that, especially to stand out in the street at night. It was very strange. Luckily, I never saw that kid again after that. Our landlord is a complete creep with no boundaries. We rent an upper level of a duplex, and our landlord lives on the main floor. I moved in and have been happily renting for the last 6 years. My landlord has always been kind, cordial, helpful, and treated me like family, often exchanging Christmas gifts, congratulating me on new jobs, and even giving me a gift card when I completed college. The rent is cheap too, which is nice. 2 years ago, my boyfriend moved in with me, and it's been a hectic 2 years of combining households and trying to get organized while quickly realizing we're outgrowing our space. My landlord also retired from his job and has been home more. Within the last year though, things have gotten weird around the apartment. Over the winter, our landlord stopped us on the way out the door when we were headed to work. He told us that we needed to clean the place up a bit as he had been poking around and noticed that it was messy. Undeniably, we were a bit disheveled from the holidays, so we both took some time off of work and got the apartment cleaned up well. But we were still disturbed by the comments of him coming into our home without our knowledge, so we purchased a security camera and waited to see what happened. Much to our horror, we found that the landlord has been entering our home without notice multiple times a week to gain access to the attic that he uses for storage. However, it's never an innocent trip up to the attic. He stops and checks each and every room to evaluate the cleanliness. I won't pretend we're the cleanest people out there, but we don't leave trash lying out. Our dishes are done, and we take care and make sure that we clean up everything that might attract mice or bugs. I would say it's not out of control at all. We have also realized our need to downsize and have secured a storage unit and have been slowly packing things we don't use and taking them to storage. Recently, we had 2 bats in our home. Most recently, there was one in our washer. Our landlord decided to call somebody to check the house for entry points. We both work evenings and are up late, so we asked when the earliest time of day was acceptable for somebody to come out. We told him we're more than willing to accommodate any time of day with proper notice. We never heard back. I woke up today to go to the bathroom and noticed my front door was open and our attic was open. I received a text message from the landlord at 10 a.m. saying that the bat guy would be there within an hour and a call at 10:44 that I had missed. I checked our camera and saw that our landlord entered our apartment without notice while we were sleeping. He made a point to move some of the totes out of the way that needed to go to storage, and then he moved them back to where they were previously to make it appear that he hadn't been there. All the thoughts running through my head of, what if I had been walking around naked, or what if I heard it and thought it was an intruder and tried to defend myself and inadvertently hurt someone? Our landlord knows our sleeping times and he knows our work schedule, and we are essentially at his mercy. At this point, we live in a state of constant anxiety about our landlord just entering our home without permission. I want to say something, but at the same time, I have a fear of being asked to leave for saying something. Our apartment is the cheapest place in town, and it's helping us on our path to saving for a home in the coming year. With all these events, though, it has us questioning what we should do and if there's any legal action we can take. At the very least, it's incredibly uncomfortable to know that somebody walks through your home unannounced whenever they seem fit, and they think it's okay to do surprise inspections of our living space. I often wonder how many times in the last 6 years he's done this, and long before I had cameras, if he's ever watched me sleep or even set up cameras himself, something creepy like that. Back when I was in high school, I remember that one time we were going to have a planned lockdown drill. I remember that we would have these about once or twice a year. Sometimes they would even tell us like the day before that we were having a drill. I think that was so nobody would be alarmed by it and worry that it was real. So on this one day, I knew that we were having a lockdown drill during the 5th period, which was the last one of the day. The drill would usually consist of an announcement, and then the teachers turning off the lights to their classroom and locking the doors. Sometimes they would make the students huddle in the back of the classroom. Other times we would just sit in our desks. My last period of the day was usually pretty boring, but I did have one of my best friends in that class, Ryan, with me. This particular time, I remember that after 4th period, Ryan said that we should skip 5th period. At this moment, we had both completely forgot about the lockdown drill. I just remember that I knew we weren't doing much in the class, and so did Ryan. It was basically like a work day, where we would just work on homework assignments and stuff. So being immature high school kids, we decided to skip class and head home early. We went to our lockers to get our stuff, and took our time as the bells sounded, indicating that class was now in session. We were in no rush, because the school was not super strict, and we figured we could just walk right out. After we left our lockers and started down a hallway, I remember that we heard the lockdown drill announcement. That's when we both remembered it. We figured that for the drill, we had better not be out in the hallway, because a hall monitor might see us and make us go to class. Plus, we were sort of far off from the nearest exit doors to the school, so we decided to go find a bathroom until the lockdown drill was over. However, on the way there, we soon heard footsteps behind us. We turned a corner and didn't look back, assuming it to be a hall monitor. So we walked faster and then turned another corner. When we did this, it sounded like the footsteps behind us were going faster as well. We quickly made our way to a bathroom and then went inside. Ryan went in one of the stalls and I went in another. We didn't close the doors to the stalls, but they stayed mostly closed on their own. Then we stood on the toilets so our feet couldn't be seen on the ground. A few moments later, we heard footsteps quickly approaching outside in the hallway. Whoever it was actually entered the bathroom, which caused me to be very nervous, and I'm sure Ryan was as well. We just stood there as quiet as can be. The person then entered the bathroom very briefly and then walked out pretty fast. It was like they just looked in really quick to see if anyone else was inside of it and then continued on. Now, Ryan and I both left our hiding spots a little bit quick. Probably like 10 seconds later, we had left the stalls and started to walk out. When we left the bathroom, we noticed that the person was still in the hallway. It was a man, and he had made it almost to the other end of the hall, and he was walking facing away from us. But we realized that this likely was not a hall monitor. He was wearing just a black jacket and jeans, which is not something that a school employee would wear. After we got out into the hallway, we noticed the man stop and then start to turn around. Ryan and I both quickly went in the other direction of the hall and then turned the corner. We started walking down the next hallway very quickly, just trying to get away from the guy. As we continued though, we soon saw someone else up ahead. This was a teacher that we both recognized. It was Mr. Herbert, and he saw us and asked us why we weren't in class, saying that a lockdown drill was going on. We told him that we were sorry and would go to class. As Mr. Herbert walked with us, escorting us to our classroom, we told him about the other man in the hallway. He didn't seem to have any idea who we were talking about and said that he would find out. Soon, we got to our classroom and were led inside. And several minutes after that, there was another announcement stating that the school was now having a real lockdown. Several times they said that this was not a drill anymore. This lockdown lasted for about an hour until it finally ended and the school got out at about the same time. We learned that the man we had seen in the hallways was not supposed to be in the school, and he was arrested for trespassing after hiding in the school. Nobody knew what his intentions were. I think it's really crazy how he just happened to be there during a lockdown drill. Did he somehow know we were having a drill and did it on purpose so nobody would suspect him or notice him? I don't really think so, but it makes for a crazy coincidence. I'm also really glad that he didn't look farther into the bathroom where Ryan and I were hiding. We both learned a valuable lesson that day not to skip class, and I don't believe either of us ever skipped again after that. A couple of years ago, I was traveling with my best friend Charlotte. We've traveled together several times now, but this was by far the scariest thing that ever happened. After our flight, we booked a hotel not too far away for the entire time that we were staying. We took an Uber there, and the hotel was pretty average for the most part. It was nothing fancy, but also nothing was really bad about it either. It was clean, and the staff was friendly, and they had a continental breakfast as well. So, I remember after being out for most of the first day, Charlotte and I got back to the hotel sometime at night. We were hanging out in the room when we noticed this one guy out the window. Our room was on the second floor, and it overlooked mostly the parking lot that was behind the hotel. It was not too busy because there was another parking lot out front where most of the people parked. The man was standing sort of at the far back of the parking lot, almost at the end of it, and he appeared to be looking right at us. Our window was not open, but we did not have any shades covering the window, so it seemed like the man could see into the room. We looked at him, and he was definitely looking right at us. The guy appeared to be somewhat short, had a goatee, and sort of long hair. He motioned to us, but I couldn't quite tell what he was doing. We were both kind of confused as to what he wanted. Then we heard him yell something at us, but I couldn't make it out. Our window was closed, and he wasn't quite loud enough. Then he pointed at us and said something else. He didn't necessarily seem angry or anything, but it was just kind of weird. Then, after pointing at us for like 10 seconds, the man started to jog through the parking lot closer to the hotel. It seemed like maybe he was going to go inside. We were a little concerned that he might go to our room or something, and the whole thing was kind of weird, so we decided to cover the windows at that point. About 5 minutes later, we heard a knock on our door. We got completely silent, and then I went over as quietly as I could and got to the door. I looked through the peephole, and sure enough, the man was standing there. We did not know what he wanted. He stood by the door and kind of looked around. After staying at the door for like 15 or 20 seconds, the man then moved along and walked away. We thought that we heard him knocking on another door, so maybe he didn't quite know which room was ours. Either way, it was kind of strange, and we weren't sure what the guy was doing. There's no way that we were answering the door for him though. So the rest of the night was fine. We hung out a while longer and then went to sleep. The next morning, Charlotte and I went down to the first floor for the continental breakfast. When we got there, there were quite a few other people. However, right after arriving, we noticed the same guy. He was standing on the far other end of the room holding a cup of coffee. As soon as we saw him, he seemed to see us. Then he started walking over in our direction. Charlotte and I both had a really bad feeling about the guy, so we decided to just go back to the room. We quickly turned around and went back. After getting back to the room, we decided to just leave the hotel and go on with our plans for the day. When we left the hotel, we didn't see the man. We were gone for the whole day and arrived back sometime that night. I remember that things were quiet by that point. We walked through the lobby and then went up to the second floor to get to our room. As we were walking down the hallway to our room, we heard someone at the far other end of the hall. I didn't really think anything of it, but I looked over and then noticed that the man was there. He was walking in our direction and also walking really fast. Charlotte noticed too and tried to hurry up and put the key in the door. She got it open and we both quickly went inside. We slammed the door shut behind us. Probably 10 seconds later, the man arrived at the door and tried to open it. Then he quickly knocked on the door. We called down to the front desk and reported the man. He walked away from the door after we didn't answer again. We were nervous that we would keep seeing him, but he didn't come back that night and we didn't see him the next day or for the rest of our trip. I guess either the hotel staff found him and kicked him out or something, or maybe he just realized that we wanted nothing to do with him and left. Either way, I'm really glad that he never got into the room, and I'm glad that we never answered the door for him. About 12 years ago, my boyfriend at the time and I stumbled across what seemed like an unbelievable deal. A quiet little studio on top of a hill that we could rent for almost nothing. The catch was that we had to help maintain the 3 properties on the land and occasionally help our landlord with meals or drive him into town. Usually, if we took him out to eat, he treated us, so it honestly worked out pretty well. The studio itself needed a fair amount of work to be done before it was comfortable. We spent our first weeks doing renovations and fixing things up. Our studio sat at the top of a long driveway. Across the driveway, about 150 feet away, lived our only neighbor. Our landlord lived farther off to the right, about 3/4 of a football field away, and his girlfriend stayed in an apartment above his garage. The landlord was incredibly easygoing. We got free cable, water, and electricity. The only bill we had to worry about was propane for heat and hot water, which we had shared with the neighbors because both houses used the same large propane tank. We didn't officially meet the neighbor until a few weeks after we moved in. We introduced ourselves and chatted politely. A couple of weeks later, I ran into her again outside, and we talked for nearly an hour. Eventually, the conversation turned to the renovations we had been doing, and I invited her inside to show her the progress. Since it was a studio, stepping through the front door basically showed you the whole house. But the moment she walked in, she pointed at our bed and asked, "Is that a used mattress?" The question caught me completely off guard. I'm extremely particular about keeping my bed clean. I use waterproof mattress covers and keep everything spotless. The bright white edges of the mattress was visible from when I had made the bed earlier that morning. All I could say was, "No, I bought it brand new." After that awkward moment, we didn't see much of each other for a few weeks. Then one day, the landlord's girlfriend pulled me aside and told me something shocking. Apparently, our neighbor had been telling both her and the landlord that my boyfriend and I were known for burglarizing houses. I was stunned. Neither of us had criminal records, and neither of us had ever known anyone who committed burglaries. Supposedly, the neighbor claimed she knew because her daughter had recently become a police officer and worked at the jail. We all eventually dismissed the accusation, but the whole situation felt bizarre. Not long after that, I started noticing the dirty looks. Things got even stranger when I had to go collect her half of the propane bill. She handed me a check, and when I read her name aloud, something suddenly clicked in my memory. Years earlier, when I was about 16, I had gone to her house for Thanksgiving with my high school boyfriend. Her parents were friends with her and her husband, and their daughter was around our age. We all hung out while the adults drank and cooked dinner. I barely remembered interacting with adults, except during the dinner. But afterwards, my boyfriend told me that I wasn't welcome back to that house. We couldn't understand why. A couple of months later, I found out. I had hit puberty early and wasn't exactly flat-chested. My boyfriend's father apparently spent the evening staring at my chest, and the neighbor's husband had as well. Once the wives heard about it, they were furious. Somehow, I ended up being the one banned from their house. Now, more than a decade later, she clearly remembered who I was, and recently she had gone through a bitter divorce from that same husband. After that realization, the tension between us only grew. Every time I locked my car with the key fob and the horn chirped, she would immediately make her car horn honk too from inside her house. Then our landlord told us that she had asked that we stay completely off her property and never knock on her door again. Ironically, a few days later, she asked the landlord to request that we go inside her house while she was gone, to assemble a treadmill that she had bought, leaving her door unlocked for us. Things escalated further when a friend came to visit us one day. When he walked up our driveway, he looked confused. He told us the neighbor had taken a photo of his license plate and asked whether he planned to stay the night. Soon she started photographing our vehicles as well. She became extremely petty in monitoring whether we drove too fast up the driveway, yelling if she thought we crossed onto her side, and even threatening to sue us because one of our cats supposedly scratched her car. Around that time, one of my cats, an especially curious one, wandered into her house when she had left her door open. Not too long after, the cat disappeared. My boyfriend and I searched everywhere. A couple months later, we smelled something dead somewhere on the property, but we never found the source. The atmosphere on the property became tense for everyone, including the landlord and his girlfriend. One afternoon, I caught her sneaking around the side of our house while my boyfriend and I were talking outside. She was clearly eavesdropping. After that, I started hearing strange noises outside our windows at night. Then there was the mail. All three houses shared a single locked mailbox, and only the landlord had the key. Since he and his girlfriend didn't drive, the neighbor usually picked up the mail and dropped it off at his house for everyone. One day, I was expecting a state check in the mail, but it never showed up. Later, I also noticed I wasn't receiving other important items such as my driver's license, vehicle registration tags, and even social security paperwork. That's when I came up with a plan. I created an envelope that looked like an important piece of mail addressed to me and gave it directly to our mailman to place in the mailbox. Then I waited. Sure enough, when the neighbor brought the mail to the landlord's house, my envelope was missing. I reported the theft to the postmaster and even contacted the sheriff. But because mail theft is a federal issue and it was during the early recession, the case was never pursued. Then things got even worse when the neighbor recommended a young couple rent the apartment above the landlord's garage. Despite all her paranoia about our visitors, the couple she brought in turned out to be criminals. One night while we were out at dinner, they broke into the landlord's house and stole a phone from the living room. The phone was one I had lended to my landlord. It was my recently deceased mother's phone. I confronted them after confirming the phone was inside their apartment by texting it and hearing the distinctive notification tone. They denied everything. Later, the same couple stole the landlord's car. It was found 4 days later abandoned in a nearby canyon, costing him nearly $3,000 in impound fees. Eventually, I moved out once renovations on the house I had inherited from my mom were finished. The final straw came when the neighbor let her large German Shepherd loose just as my 4-year-old son stepped out of my car. The dog ran towards him, barking and growling. The landlord later told me that the neighbor calmed down after I left, even though my boyfriend still lived there. After I moved away for good, life finally went back to normal. Looking back, the only explanation we could come up with was that she had held on to some strange resentment from that awkward Thanksgiving years earlier and blamed her divorce on me. Either way, living next door to her was definitely an experience I'll never forget. This started when I was in kindergarten or first grade. The neighbors who terrorized us lived one house over, and it's important to know that their teenage son, who I will call Jack, was known as a screw-up. He was caught on camera watching our next-door neighbor showering. My parents were friends with our neighbors, so she told my mom. Then my dad's expensive racing bikes got stolen out of our detached garage. My dad saw Jason riding the stolen bike around the neighborhood, so he thought he should just confront his parents and demand the bike back. The father asked Jason right in front of my dad if he took the bike, and Jason said no. Then Jason's father threatened my dad with violence. We called the police, but they were no help. Not too long after that, Jason's dad showed up outside of our house, yelling that he and his friend were going to beat up my dad for yelling at Jason. Not too long after, something horrible happened. We left our pet bunny and guinea pig outside on nice days, and only if someone was home. That day was one of those days. My brother and I got back from going out with our mom and ran to check on them. I can still see what I saw in my head. Our bunny was drowned in our kiddie pool, and the guinea pig had been kicked across the yard into the alley. My mom, brother, and I were all crying hysterically. They were innocent, and only a psychopath would murder helpless animals. Her injuries were so severe that we had to put her to sleep. Jason's dad did this because my dad had yelled at Jason about stealing his bike earlier that week. My mom had enough and confronted the dad, who just laughed. He said they were just animals. My parents called the police, who informed them that they were at the house constantly anyways, and I can't remember if Jason's dad got in trouble. Time passed for a while without any problems from the neighbors, until one night when I was in 2nd grade. I was asleep with my dog named Wrinkles in bed with me, where my bed faces the windows. Suddenly, Wrinkles was going nuts, and I heard a sound coming from near the screen on my open window. Then a loud male whisper which sounded like Jason. He said in more obscene terms that he was going to have relations with me. I jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room, shaking and crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I told them someone was outside my window. They called the police, who found one of our lounge chairs outside my window, and the screen ripped like someone was trying to get into my room. They also found a shoe print. It was so traumatic and disgusting that a 16-year-old would say that to a 2nd grader. They went to Jason's house, but apparently he wasn't home, and they searched for him but never found him. My parents put up lights all the way around the house after that. A short time later, my mom found a paper plate with rice and a dead crow outside of our back door. Our evil neighbors moved not long after the husband died. His wife had joked about poisoning him before, so we always wonder if that's what ended up happening. The whole thing was extremely messed up, and it all started over a stolen bike. Jason is apparently a cop now, but I really hope that's false. When I moved to my new apartment, everything in my life felt like it was finally working out. I had just been promoted at work after years of grinding. My salary doubled, I bought my first new car, and I was finally leaving my cramped studio for a real apartment. It was a corner unit on the 8th floor with a wide window that looked over the river and the downtown lights. The building looked older from outside, but the apartment itself was great. 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, a living room big enough for the couch I had been saving for, and the rent was also lower than anything else I had seen in that area. I signed the lease that same day. The move-in was exhausting, and that night I sat on the couch eating takeout and watching random shows until I passed out. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to noises above me. It sounded like someone stomping on the floor above me. I checked the time, and it was 2:15 a.m. I didn't want to start trouble with my neighbors on the first night, so I ignored it. I put in earbuds and went back to sleep. The next night, the same thing happened, but I figured maybe the people upstairs had just moved in too. But the next night, the same thing happened again. Sometimes I heard what sounded like objects hitting the floor. One night, it sounded like dishes were breaking. Another time, I thought I heard a woman shouting, but the words were muffled and short. It went on every night. By the 6th day in my new apartment, I was barely sleeping. I started coming home from work already stressed, just waiting for it to start again. On Friday night, I got back at around 10:30 p.m. I showered and laid in bed scrolling on my phone. Eventually, the noises started again. That was the moment I decided I was done ignoring it. I put on my shoes and went upstairs. I knocked lightly and then harder a couple times, and stood there for a good 5 minutes waiting for someone to open the door, but nobody came. Confused, I went back down to my apartment, figuring they didn't want to confront me. The next morning was Saturday, and after another long night of noise, I decided I would deal with it once and for all. I grabbed my phone and called the building's front desk. I got no answer though, so I waited a few minutes, threw on my shoes, locked my door, and headed to the stairwell to head down to the main lobby. The stairwell lights were off for some reason, so it was darker than usual. As I started down the stairs, I heard footsteps behind me. They were slow at first, but then they matched my pace. By the time I reached the 6th floor, they sounded closer and were speeding up. I didn't know why, but my chest got tighter and I felt the urge to run down the stairs the rest of the way. As I sped up and ran down the stairs as fast as I could, I heard footsteps behind me accelerating into a run. I ran the rest of the way down and pushed the doors to the lobby. The guard was sitting at the desk, and I told him all about the problems I'd been having with my neighbors upstairs. He looked confused and said that he had only started working there 2 days ago. He didn't know anything about the building yet or the residents, but he mentioned the previous guard had worked there over 10 years and lived a few streets away. He gave me the address. I drove there immediately, and the old guard was very friendly and let me into his place. I explained everything I had been dealing with yet again to the older guard. Eventually, he sighed and told me there used to be a couple living in that unit above me. They argued all the time, and everyone in the building could hear it. He went on to say that one night the husband snapped, and the neighbors heard fighting, things breaking, and someone screaming. The man had killed his wife in that apartment directly above me, and the police took him away that same night. After that, every tenant who moved into the unit below complained about the same noises that I had described, so that had forced me to move out of my dream apartment after only a week, which apparently was the longest anyone had lasted in my unit. My girlfriend and I have been together for a little over 2 years now. Not long after we started dating, she moved into my place. I'd been living there alone for a while, so having someone around felt different at first, but in a good way. The house is small, but the yard is big for the area. When summer came around, we decided to make the most of it. We bought one of those above-ground pools from a hardware store and set it up behind the garage. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was perfect for hot afternoons after work. We started inviting friends over on weekends. Sometimes we'd grill, other times we'd sit around a fire pit built with leftover bricks. One night we had a few people over, just relaxing and having a couple drinks. It was getting late when a man from the house behind ours walked through the alleyway to our yard. I had seen him before but never really talked to him. He introduced himself and started chatting like he had known us for years. He talked about the weather, the neighborhood, and our dog. Then he started asking about the pool. He kept looking at it while he talked. "Looks nice," he said. "Must be good on days like this." My girlfriend and I said yeah, it was nice to cool off after work. Then he said something like, "I wish I had something like that, and I see you two out there all the time." He was probably around 50 or so. We were both in our early 20s. I didn't think much of it at the time. I'm usually pretty easygoing with neighbors, so I told him if he ever wanted to swim, he could just ask us and let us know. A few weeks later, I was still at work one afternoon when my girlfriend called me. She told me she had gotten home early that day. Our driveway curves around the house, so you can't see the backyard from the street. When she walked into the kitchen, she looked out the window above the sink. That window looked straight into the yard, and the neighbor was in our pool, just floating there. She told me she froze for a second because she didn't expect to see anyone back there. I told her to stay inside and I would be home as soon as I could. By the time I got back, he was gone. I was mad. I knew I had told him he could swim sometime, but I meant with permission, not just showing up when nobody was home. So I took the ladder off the pool and put it in the shed so that nobody could use it unless we took the ladder out. Later that evening, I saw the guy outside while walking the dog. I told him he couldn't just come into our yard like that. He apologized and said he thought it was fine because of what I had said before. He promised it wouldn't happen again. For a while, things were quiet. But after that, we started noticing him more often. He would stand in his yard and look towards our house. Sometimes he would be out there when my girlfriend got home from work. Sometimes it was late at night, too. Around that same time, we were talking with some other neighbors down the street, and his name came up. One of them told us something that shocked me. Apparently, the guy had a history. They said he had been in trouble before involving a family member. They didn't know all the details, but they said it was serious. That already made things uncomfortable. Then another neighbor told us something that was even worse. They said the guy had been bragging to another neighbor that he could see inside our house at night. He had been talking about looking at my girlfriend through our windows, to the point where he had binoculars that he could use as well. The way our house is set up, the kitchen and laundry area both have large windows facing the backyard. At the time, we didn't have blinds or curtains there. I had lived alone before and never thought about it. My girlfriend usually changes clothes in the laundry room after work. When I heard that story, I felt my face getting hot and I was furious. I asked our neighbor if they had any extra private property signs because they had some put up around in their yard. They gave me one and a metal stake. I walked straight into our backyard with a hammer and planted the sign right by the fence line. The guy was outside when I did it. I yelled across the yard telling him to stay away from our property and stop watching our house. A couple other neighbors came outside because of the shouting. My girlfriend stayed inside the whole time. After that, I came back in. I taped a blanket over the laundry room window, and I told her we'd buy proper curtains the next day. Later that night, we looked the guy up online. It turned out that the stories were true. Years earlier, he had been arrested for abusing a relative, and he was also a registered offender. Thankfully, about 2 months later, we noticed a moving truck at his place. By the end of the week, he was gone. When I was 19, I rented a small basement unit with my sister and her baby. It was one of those split houses where the landlord lived upstairs and rented out the lower level. The place wasn't great, but it was cheap and close to where I worked. The landlord was a quiet guy in his late 50s. He didn't talk much, but he always seemed to be around. A couple months after we moved in, he told us he needed to bring someone over to check the water heater. While the repair guy was there, I noticed he paid more attention to us than the heater. If I walked from the kitchen to the living room, his eyes would follow. At one point, I caught him standing in the hallway near the bedrooms, even though the heater was in a separate closet. When I asked if he needed help, he just said he was checking pressure and went back. After about an hour, he left, and I didn't really know anything about water heaters, so I couldn't judge his process too much. 2 days later, my sister took her baby to stay overnight at a friend's place, leaving me alone. Around 9 p.m., I heard a knock on the door. It was the same guy who had come to fix the heater 2 days prior. He said he needed to recheck something and that it would only take a minute. I told him it wasn't a good time and he should come back when the landlord was home. He insisted, saying it was urgent and it could cause a leak if not handled right away. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. I kept the door mostly closed and told him to come back the next day. That's when he put his hand in the door and tried to push it open, not hard yet, but softly, I guess, trying to coerce his way into my place. He smiled, but it didn't match what he was doing. I told him to leave, but instead of answering, he looked past me into the apartment and took another step forward. I pushed the door shut harder and told him to leave. Right before I closed it completely, I saw movement near the side of the entrance where the wall jutted out just enough to block part of the view. My landlord was standing there, pressed flat against the wall, just out of sight from the doorway. I slammed the door, locked it, and didn't move for a while. I could hear low voices outside for a few seconds, then footsteps going up the stairs. I didn't sleep well that night and even barricaded the door with some furniture. The next morning, I told my sister everything. We packed our stuff that same day and left. We didn't tell the landlord we were going until after we were gone. The landlord and the repair guy, who I'm assuming was his buddy, definitely could have forced their way into my apartment because I almost believed the repair guy at first. However, I'm glad that I ended up being safe that night. I contacted the police about it, but I have no idea if anything ever happened with my report. This happened to me on January 17th, 2026. The neighbors were fighting next door. I heard the loud yelling and thumping from the weak walls of the apartment. At this time, I was in the kitchen preparing meals and getting ready to receive some packages. Then, out of nowhere, someone started to knock at my front door. It started out normal, but quickly started getting louder and more demanding. I went to look through my peephole and saw that there was a lady there. Her huge eyes were looking back at me. I stepped back and I asked what she wanted. She started asking for a phone and whining. The lady really wanted me to open the door, but I didn't want to. She started to shake the doorknob violently and then began pushing and clawing at the door. I walked away. The lady that lives with me also went to check through the door from the noise. She was actually considering opening the door to that crazed woman. I kept telling her not to, and I was even so scared that I weaponed up. If she comes in, we're all going out together, was the only thing going through my mind in that moment. We didn't open the door though. Instead, we kept asking what the lady wanted and telling her to go away, but she did not. Here's some audio I recorded of the event. Then, just like it happened, it just stopped. She moved away from the door and just left. Lucky for us, that crazy lady moved on, but we're still reeling from what happened. Back when I was a kid, we moved into this new house when I was about 8 years old. We only lived there for about 3 or 4 years, and we moved around a few times for my dad's job. But I remember this place pretty well, and there was something kind of creepy that happened when we lived there. So the house was in a pretty quiet neighborhood. However, there were a lot of houses there, as it was a pretty typical neighborhood of many streets with a good amount of houses on them all next to each other. The houses were not all the same size though, as most of them looked different from each other. Some were larger or smaller than others, but for the most part it was a middle-class area. I remember that our house had a decent-sized front yard and a good-sized driveway as well. So I would go outside all the time. I didn't know many of the neighbors on our street, but I remember that there was this house that was behind the one across the street from us and one over to the right. This house was always visible because it was 3 stories tall, so it kind of towered over the others. So at some point, I don't recall exactly when, I started noticing something from this tall house. When I would be outside, I would often see someone in one of the top windows of the house, seemingly watching me with binoculars. It appeared to be a woman, but I couldn't tell many details about her at all. It was really far away, but it always looked like she was watching me. For some reason, at first, it didn't seem to bother me too much. And then I didn't know if she was really watching me or maybe something else nearby, like maybe she was bird watching. I was too far to tell exactly what she was looking at, but it often appeared as though she was looking right at me. It wouldn't happen every time I was outside, but it would happen quite often, and she would do almost the same thing every time. She would just be there in the window with binoculars, staring right at me seemingly. When I looked over at her, she wouldn't move or anything. In fact, she would barely move at all, and I never saw anybody else at that window either. It was really weird. And after it happened at least like 10 different times, it kind of creeped me out. One time when she was watching me, I was confused by it like always. So for some reason on this occasion, I decided to wave up at her. This time when I did, she did not wave back at me, but actually moved away and out of view. That was the only unusual thing I remember through most of it. Being a kid though, I would just continue to go outside and hang out there. I really had no idea who she was, and I didn't tell anybody about it either. Then I remember that after probably months of this, I went outside one time at night. I don't remember why I was outside or exactly how late it was, but I know that it was completely dark out. As I was outside there in the driveway or front yard area, I remember noticing the neighbor watching me from the window again. For some reason, it felt creepier at night. But then, as I was watching her watch me, she moved away from the window and was quickly out of view. I didn't think too much of it. In fact, I was obviously glad that she was gone. So I stayed outside, and then I remember like 2 or 3 minutes later, I heard a car start to drive down our street from the end. Our street was really quiet, especially at night, so I looked over to see. I didn't recognize the car, but it was driving really slow. Surprisingly though, I noticed the car slowing down and then parking on the side of the road just about across from our house on the other side of the street. It was not exactly in front of our house and slightly closer to the neighbors, but it was close enough. When I looked to the driver's window though, at first I couldn't see well enough. But then I noticed it appeared to be the same woman who would watch me from the window. This had never happened before. She parked the car but did not get out, and she appeared to be looking at me again. I was so creeped out that I ran inside and then covered all the windows. When I looked out of a front window maybe 10 minutes later, she was gone. After that, I didn't go outside for a while, especially not at night. However, when I returned to going outside again, maybe a few weeks later, I didn't see her anymore. I never noticed her watching me from her window again, and I never saw her car either. I'm not sure what was going on there, but it was really strange. Maybe she moved, maybe she just decided to stop spying on me, but we didn't live in that house for too long, as I said. I don't know if she still lives there or not, but I randomly remember that, and I wonder what the deal was. I live with my husband in a house that we've had for a few years now. Last year, something crazy occurred. We know some of the neighbors, but not everyone. Some I will just recognize, and others I've actually talked to and are friends with. People around here seem nice, and we've never had any problems with anyone. Generally, nothing crazy has happened here, and things will usually be pretty calm and quiet. For a little more background, I work a job where I get there early and generally am back home by 3 p.m. and sometimes 2. My husband will arrive home at a more normal time of around 5 or so, and we both work on weekdays. So one day, after I got back from work, my cell phone rang from a number that I didn't recognize, but it had a local area code. I answered it out of curiosity. It was a woman on the other end who I didn't recognize by her voice, but she sounded friendly. She said that she was my neighbor from down the street, and she had got my number from another neighbor. She then asked me if her son could stay at my house when he got home the following day. The reason was because she would be gone for work, and she just wanted me to have him stay here until she was back. Without really giving it much thought, I said sure, it would not be a problem. Now, I was wondering some things in my head, but I didn't ask them because I didn't want to seem rude. Like, for example, why did she ask me? I was fairly confident that I had never met this lady before, and I didn't even know exactly what house she lived in. Why would she trust me with her son when we had never met? But really, I assumed that she probably had spoken to the neighbors, and they had vouched for me. How did she know I would be home at that time also? Again, I thought probably the neighbors told her. I wasn't sure though, but I had talked about my job and other stuff to some neighbors. So I wasn't being suspicious or anything, and really I was just confused. I thought maybe the lady was new to the neighborhood and didn't really know anyone, and maybe the other neighbors weren't able to watch her kid first. I didn't mind watching her son, and I'm pretty good with kids and have watched friends' children in the past. So she told me that her son would come over at about 3 o'clock the following day, and when she got back from work, she could pick him up. I said okay, and we left it at that. I figured it would be easy, and he could just sit in the living room for a couple hours and watch TV or something. I told my husband about it when he got back, and he was just like, cool. So the next day, after I got back from work, there was no call or anything from the neighbor, but I luckily remembered. Shortly after 3 p.m., there was a knock at the front door. I went over and opened it, and was shocked at what I saw. There was no child there, but a tall, skinny-looking grown man standing outside my front door. He was young, looked to be early 20s, but he was definitely an adult nonetheless. When I opened the door, he smelled of cigarettes and alcohol. He had an overall dirty appearance. I was shocked. He then opened the door further and just walked right in with a backpack over his shoulder, saying a casual, "Hey, what's up?" After a moment, I said, "Who are you?" He said, "Didn't my mom tell you that I was coming over?" I said, "Yeah, but I thought you were like 7 or 8 years old." He said no, he was 25. What he said next shocked me even more. He said, "Yeah, I just need a place to stay until my mom comes back from her work trip in a few days." I was thinking, what? A few days? I asked him what he meant, and he told me that he would be staying here, and he asked where he would sleep. I told him I thought there was a misunderstanding, and not only did I think he was a young child, but I thought he would only be staying here for a few hours. His mom said nothing about it. I told him that we didn't have any space for him to stay the night. He started talking about how he didn't have anywhere to go, and how his girlfriend had kicked him out and stuff. I asked him why he can't stay at his mom's place without her being there, and he said that she had kicked him out too, and it was complicated. I didn't want to get into his family drama, and maybe he was going through a rough patch, but it wasn't fair for him to be dumped on me like this. I told him I was sorry, but he had to go. This is where his attitude seemed to change. He got slightly angry and said no, he was staying here, because I said he could. I told him once again to leave. That's when he said no once more, and he walked farther into the house. He went upstairs, almost running. I went after him, but when I got up there, he had run into our bedroom and shut the door and locked it behind him. I tried to get him to come out, but he was ignoring me. So then I called my husband and told him of the situation. He said he was on his way home. Then I tried reasoning with the guy, but he was completely ignoring me. I threatened to call the police, but that didn't seem to have an effect on him. I was seriously going to call the cops, but decided to wait until my husband got back. I then attempted to call the guy's mom, but when I did, the number appeared to have blocked me, because the calls would not go through. I went downstairs and just hoped that the guy wasn't going to steal or damage anything. My husband arrived home a short time later, and the guy was still up there. My husband went upstairs and started banging on the door and threatening to beat the guy up and stuff. After like 5 minutes of this, it finally got him to leave. He left the bedroom and ran down the stairs, practically being chased by my husband. He left and sprinted away down the street. We looked and nothing was stolen or messed up, thankfully. After that, I tried to figure out if they really lived on our street or not. I asked a few neighbors, but none of them said they gave my number to anyone else. So I really don't know who this woman was or how she got my number. I think maybe she did live down the street, or at least in the area, because I know there are a lot of houses on the block, and also she had to have known what time I get home every day, and I think that she might have been watching me, but it remains a bit of a mystery. I'm certainly going to ask more questions next time someone asks me to watch their kid. I live in what I've always considered to be a quiet and safe neighborhood. Nothing much seems to happen here. The houses are slightly spread out, and it's not quite out in the country, but not that close to the city either. I know most of the neighbors, and I'm friends with a good amount of them. A few years ago, I was at home with my wife, and it got to be late. The weather was nice, and I had been doing a little bit of work out in the garage. Nothing that crazy, just messing around with some old junk. I left the door open because I had many times before and nothing had ever happened. When I was inside and it was getting pretty late, like after 10 p.m., I heard my wife say something. She said that it looked like Jeff was coming over. He's a neighbor that lived a short ways down the street. I knew him decently well, and I had talked to him many times before. Occasionally, we would stop by each other's places if we saw each other outside working on something or something like that. I went over to the window and wondered why he would be coming over so late at night. I watched Jeff walk up the driveway, but instead of going and turning to go to the front door, he went straight. This led him straight towards the garage and out of my sight. I thought that he must have been thinking I was still in the garage, so I went to get my shoes on and go outside. Within probably a minute, I left the house. I walked over to the garage, but when I got there, Jeff was gone. He was not in the garage and was nowhere in sight. I called out but got no response. It was so strange because I knew that I had just seen him walk up my driveway. I went in the backyard and then went back to the front, and he just wasn't there. But then, after going back in the garage, I noticed something. A few of my things were gone. Could Jeff have stolen them? Nothing else made any sense. I went back inside and told my wife about the crazy situation. She didn't know what to make of it. I decided to go over and talk to Jeff the following day. So the next day, I went to his house and knocked on the door, but he did not answer. I was a little suspicious, but maybe he just wasn't home. After that, though, I was always sure to close my garage. So sometime, maybe a week later or so, I happened to notice Jeff outside. I walked up and approached him, and he seemed normal at first. I told him how I saw him walking up my driveway the other night, but he completely denied it. I told him he took my stuff, but he denied that too. He said that he thought I must be joking. To be nice, I said I must be mistaken then, and then I left. I didn't want to get into a big argument with my neighbor. I didn't think it was worth it. The stuff that he stolen was valuable, but not that valuable. I wasn't that desperate to get it back. So I went back home, and since then we haven't spoken. I know he took my stuff. I think he saw the garage door open, thought that I had gone to bed, and simply walked in and took it. But to be safe and avoid being seen, he left the garage through the back door and then cut through my neighbor's yard to go back home. It's pretty crazy how he did that. I'm hoping that nothing more like that happens, but I'm going to be careful around him. I live by myself in an apartment. When I first moved in here, I got a rude awakening, literally. It was probably like my second or third week living here. I have a small one-bedroom apartment in a pretty decent building, and my place is on the second floor. It's a nice place overall, not a dump by any means, and most of the people seem nice. At the time, I didn't know any of my neighbors immediately around me though. So after a short time there, one night I was awoken to the sound of someone knocking loudly at my front door. I got up and out of bed, seeing that it was after midnight, and I went to see who was there. The knocking stopped by the time I arrived at the door though. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. It was strange. I was kind of creeped out by this odd event. Why would anybody come to my door so late? By the next day though, I had mostly forgot about it. However, a few nights later, the same thing happened again, except this time I was still awake. It was late at night and I heard a knocking on the door. I got up and went to the peephole and saw this woman knocking. I didn't know what she wanted, so I went to open the door. I unlocked it first. However, as soon as I started to do this, I heard her take off running. By the time the door was open and I looked into the hallway, I saw her entering an apartment door just down the hall and across it. So she was my neighbor. I didn't know why she was seemingly pranking me like this. I went back in and was confused, but there was no more knocking that night. The very next night though, she came back and knocked at my door again at around the same time, and once more ran away. It was pretty annoying, to be honest. I didn't know if she was pranking me or what. Maybe she was serious, maybe she wanted something, but every time I went to the door she would just run away. I let it go this time. However, the very next night she did it again, and I had it. I went to the door really fast, but she was already gone by then. So I walked over there and I knocked on her door. She didn't answer or do anything, so I knocked again, this time louder. When I did, I heard her yell really loud from the other side of the door. It was like she was right there on the other side, but I hadn't heard her walking over to the door. She told me to go away and stop bothering her so late at night. She sounded seriously angry. I could not believe her nerve. It was like she was acting like I was the one banging on her door all the time. I yelled that she was the one who kept knocking on my door, and I told her to stop. She interrupted me and yelled really loud for me to go away or she would call the cops. I was furious. I told her to do it, and then I banged on her door really loud one last time. Then I walked back to my apartment. The cops never came. But after that, she never knocked on my door late at night again either. I still live here. I don't think she lives there anymore though. I never saw her again around the building or anything. I haven't seen anyone coming or going from that apartment. However, I'm hoping that she does not currently still live here. I went to McDonald's at night not too long ago. I go there all the time and usually late at night. You see, I work at Walmart and I typically get off of work at like 11 p.m. or so. I live in an apartment nearby with my roommate and it's less than a mile away. I often walk to and from work, and right on the way back is a McDonald's. They're open 24 hours, so I go there a lot after work. One night I left work at Walmart and started heading home. I was walking back, however, as I passed by the McDonald's I realized how hungry I was. So I walked inside and then ordered some food on the touchscreen menu. As I was doing that, a guy randomly walked up to me. Now, we were literally the only two people in the McDonald's that were not employees, and this guy had entered after me. I looked over at him. He was kind of short, but was wearing a winter hat and jacket. The guy told me that he had followed me from Walmart. I was confused. Before I said anything though, the guy laughed a little and then walked away from me. I finished ordering and then I went and I sat down to wait for my order, far away from the other guy. We both just sat there inside of the McDonald's on opposite ends. A few minutes later, my order was done and I went up and got it. Then I walked outside of the McDonald's. I had been hoping that the man would not follow me out, but he did. After I started walking on the sidewalk, I heard the guy following me. I had no clue why this random guy would be following me. It was pretty much a straight walk back to my apartment building though, so I kept going, with the guy maybe 30 feet back. I thought about running for it or stopping and confronting the guy, but I did neither at first. When I had made it to where I could see my building in the distance, I thought I heard the man getting closer. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore and I just started running. But when I did, I heard the man yell something at me. He said, "Go ahead and run, I know where you live." This really freaked me out. I kept running though. Maybe he was just trying to scare me. I sprinted all the way back to my apartment complex and then I got into the building and went inside. The man did not catch me or anything, and I wasn't sure where he was at that point because I didn't see him, and I didn't hear him either. Then I quickly went to my apartment and made it inside. I locked the door behind me and finally stopped to catch my breath. I felt safe now, and my roommate was already sleeping by this time. Maybe 5 minutes later though, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I knew it was the guy who had been following me. He really did know where I lived. I walked over to the door, and as I did, I heard him laughing from the other side. I looked through the peephole, and he was standing there seeming very amused. Then he turned and walked away. After that, he did not come back. I still wonder why the guy did that to me. Was he just joking around? But how did he know where I lived? It was very weird. I used to work as a delivery driver for the local pizza place that was by me. It was a pretty good place and popular in the local town. There would be a lot of deliveries that I would get, and I would have to drive all over. I still remember my creepiest delivery though. It was kind of like the stereotype delivery that I did not want to get when I signed up for the job. So we got an order pretty late at night, like 11 p.m. I got the pizza and then I got the address and headed out. I didn't know where it was, but I knew that I had never really delivered to that area before. At this point, I was still fairly new to the job, and I was also young, like 18 years old. Upon arriving to the neighborhood, I saw that it was really sketchy looking and run down. Many houses there had overgrown yards, and some had boarded up windows. There were old cars with duct tape holding up the fenders and looking all beat up. When I got to the house that I was to deliver to, it didn't look any better than the rest. I was already creeped out and didn't even want to leave the car, but I had a job to do, so I parked on the side of the street and then got out. There was also hardly any light provided by street lamps. There were just a few, and then I crossed the street and I walked onto the property. I made my way to the front step and then rang the doorbell. I saw that all the lights inside the house appeared to be off, which was not a good sign. As I waited, I was getting more and more nervous by the second. After probably a full minute, I still hadn't heard anything. I wanted to just bolt out of there and go back to the shop. Still, I forced myself to stay there because the pizza had not yet been paid for. Within a few more seconds, I started to hear movement inside, like somebody was walking around, but I still didn't see any lights turn on or anything. I just had a strong instinct to run and get out of there, so I did. I just set the pizza down and then bolted, like I had wanted to do much earlier. I literally ran off the property, leaving the pizza on the front step. Then I crossed the street again and made it to my car. After I got inside and started the engine, I felt much safer. Before leaving, I looked around. That's when I saw what appeared to be a man walking through the front yard. It was really dark, so I couldn't see very well, and the house was slightly behind me. but I saw a guy start to walk out and cross the street from the property. He was like 50 feet at least behind my car, and he wasn't walking towards me, but it still seemed odd. It seemed like this was the guy who had been in the house, and he hadn't even picked up the pizza. So at that point, I started to drive away. As I was making my way down the street, I saw the lights to this car that had been parked a ways behind me on the street turn on. That guy must have gotten inside of it. Then the car started driving. The first thing that I noticed at this point was how quickly the car accelerated, much too quick for the residential street that we were on. As I continued to drive, the car quickly caught up to me and was soon right on my bumper. That gave me a bad feeling once again. I turned off the street to a busier one, and the car behind me did the same thing. I realized then that I was likely being followed. I started driving around randomly and turning at random places. The car kept up with me and did the same things that I did. With it being really late at night, the roads were pretty quiet. That made it probably easier for the guy to keep up with me. It wasn't until I had been randomly driving around for like 10 minutes that I remembered to go to a police station, and it worked like a charm. The guy followed me until we were there. Then he circled around the parking lot of the station before leaving. I stayed there for a few minutes, called my boss to explain what had happened, and then went back. Luckily, I didn't get in trouble with my boss for not getting the money for the pizza. He understood that it could have been dangerous. I didn't have to deliver to that neighborhood again, which I'm really grateful for. Other than that, I enjoyed being a pizza delivery driver. That story still gives me the creeps to think about though. For almost a year, I worked at a Subway restaurant in my local town. I was able to become a manager there, and the town that I lived in was pretty small, so I often worked by myself. I was able to open or close the store if I needed to, and we usually wouldn't be that busy. It's more of a rural area, so other than weekends or the early evening, it was never that busy. One night, I was working a closing shift by myself. For the last few hours, it was dead, and we barely had any customers. When we closed, I did some cleaning and final tasks, locked up, and then left for the night. I got to my car, which I had parked kind of far away in the parking lot. You see, the parking lot to the Subway is connected with this other parking lot. That was for an office building, and it sort of went around a corner. As I sat in my car reading some texts before leaving, I could still see the Subway sort of. I noticed a man walk up to the doors and try to open them. I wasn't quite sure where this man had come from because no other cars were around. But after trying to open the doors, the man did not leave. He just kept standing there, and I could see that he was looking inside now. I decided to go let him know that we were closed, so I started my car and then I began driving towards the man through the parking lot. I remember that as I was doing this, he looked over at me and then started to walk away from the Subway. I drove a little bit closer, stopped, and rolled down my window. I said that the Subway was closed and told him the time that we closed at. He just said okay and then continued walking off. Then I drove away and went home. So the next night, I was working the exact same shift. I was by myself closing again, and it was a pretty similar night to the previous one. We didn't get very many customers, and then I closed up and left like usual. This time though, after leaving, I was low on fuel, so I went over to the gas station that was nearby. The station was about a half-mile down the road, but in the opposite direction from where I had to go to get home. So I went back there and filled my tank. Then I was back on the quiet road going home again. There wasn't really anybody else out on the roads at this hour. This road happened to go right by my work of Subway again. When I drove past, I looked over, probably because I worked there. However, when I did, I saw that there was a man standing next to one of the windows. This wasn't something that was that easy to see if you were just driving by, but I was able to notice him. It was a side window that he was at, and the man was standing in the grass, so it looked really strange. I wasn't sure what was going on, so I slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. When I did, I had a little bit better view of the guy, and he looked just like the man from the night before. This was really strange. After stopping on the side of the road for less than 10 seconds, the man turned around and looked over at me. That's when I saw him turn back around and start jogging away from the Subway. Pretty soon, he was out of my sight. After him running away like that, I realized that he was probably going to try to break in. I stayed where I was for a minute or so longer, and then I drove away. When I did though, I called the police non-emergency number and alerted them about it. It was very suspicious if nothing else. The next day, the Subway was fine and had not been broken into or anything, and for the next few times that I worked at night, I didn't encounter the man or anything strange at all. But like 2 weeks after this, I saw on the internet a news story that a Subway across town had been broken into. I don't know, but I'm guessing that maybe it was the same guy. Maybe he just changed locations after I kept foiling his plans. Who knows, but I'm glad that he didn't break into the Subway that I worked at. This happened just a couple of years ago. It's one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me for sure. One day, I went to McDonald's to do some work. It can be a really good place to get work done from time to time. It's similar to a coffee shop because in many McDonald's locations, it's very quiet in the dining room most of the time. Plus, they have free Wi-Fi, outlets, and cheap food. So I went to the McDonald's location that was closest to my apartment. It was roughly a 5-minute drive, and after I got there, I think maybe one other person was sitting down. It was sometime in the morning, and I set up my computer at a spot in the middle of the restaurant with sort of high chairs. There was an outlet right there, and I plugged my computer into it. So, over the next chunk of time, I was just sitting there and working mostly. At one point, I got up and got some coffee and then came back to my seat. Some people came and went, but I didn't really notice them much. Then, after I'd been there for probably 3 hours at least, I was going to get another coffee. However, when I got up, I then realized that I didn't have my wallet. It had been in my jacket pocket on the left side, and I had taken my jacket off and it was hanging on the seat that I was sitting on. At first, I thought that I must have dropped it where it had fallen out of the pocket. I looked around the floor though and couldn't see it anywhere. Then I looked through all my stuff and checked all my pockets. I was very confused for a few moments because I couldn't find it. Leading up to that, I'd been very focused on my computer and sort of zoned out from the rest of the McDonald's. So I didn't know exactly when or how I could have lost my wallet. I just knew that I obviously had it about 2 hours prior when I got coffee. Then I looked on my phone and I noticed something that I hadn't realized before. There was a notification on my phone from about 10 minutes prior. It was from my bank and it said that my credit card purchase from McDonald's for like $1 had been approved. I hadn't used my credit card when I got the coffee, I had used my debit card. So now I was very confused. But then I had the thought that somehow somebody had stolen my wallet in this very same McDonald's and used it. To me, that made sense, but it seemed really crazy. I looked around, not thinking anyone would be dumb enough to stay around the scene of the crime. But there was this one man sitting alone by himself in a booth sort of far away from me. I saw that he too was on his laptop, and he had one large drink at the table with him, no other food. Other than that, there was a man and a woman sitting who were both eating food. I thought that maybe the guy had stolen my wallet, then he had used my credit card to get the drink. And you do not need a PIN to use the credit card, just the debit card. Obviously though, I didn't want to just go up and confront him. I had absolutely no proof of anything. It was just a coincidence at this point. I stayed there on my computer looking at the screen, really just thinking about what I should do. I was about to cancel my credit card when I saw the man get up from his seat out of the corner of my eye. He walked over to the little screen where you ordered. When he did, he sort of went out of my sight, so I didn't see what wallet he took out or what card he used. But then, literally right after the guy walked away from the screen, I got a notification on my phone. It said that another purchase from McDonald's had been approved. This one was for more money. At that point, I knew that this was the guy for sure who had stolen my wallet. I couldn't believe that he had the nerve to stay in here while I was still there. It was almost like he was mocking me. He sat back down at the booth after that. At that point, I got up and I walked over to him. I went right up to where he was sitting and he looked over at me. When he did, I said, "Give me my wallet back." The guy didn't say anything and I demanded it again. I told him that I knew he had stole it from me. Then the man started completely denying it. He claimed that I was crazy. I told him that I had proof, and I started to go on about how I saw him using my credit card and I had a charge for it. I was taking out my phone to show him, and as I was saying these things, the man put his laptop into his backpack quickly and then started getting up. He walked right past me as I was still talking to him. I knew that he was going to try to leave, so I followed him. He left the McDonald's building and I tried grabbing him, but he shoved me back and took off running. He ran to his car in the parking lot, so I quickly ran to mine. The guy left really fast, but thankfully the roads were not too busy, and I was able to see his car down the road when I left. He came up to a red light, which was kind of lucky for me, because he had been kind of far in front of me and he was also going sort of fast. At that point, I called the police. I got the guy's license plate and I knew the car type, so I relayed that information to the cops. And it's a good thing that I did, because after the light turned green, the guy pretty much sped away from me. He started driving faster and faster. At first, I was keeping up, but soon he started going 20 miles an hour over the speed limit and then 30 miles an hour over the speed limit. And I just wasn't willing to go that fast, so I slowed down and I let him get away, but I told the police the direction that he was going. At that point is when I realized that I had forgot my laptop and everything else at the McDonald's, so I drove back. This was maybe 10 minutes after I had left. When I got back to the McDonald's, thankfully all my stuff was still there where I had been sitting. And also, the food that the guy had ordered with my credit card was ready and at the counter, so I went over and I picked it up and ate it. It was pretty good. A while later, the police contacted me saying that they had my wallet. Apparently, the guy had been speeding still and actually led the cops on a brief chase. He ended up giving it up though, and they recovered my wallet. Looking back, that was one of the craziest events that I've ever been a part of. I probably should not have followed the guy in my car. Other than that, I'm just really grateful to have my wallet back. I live in an apartment complex that's fairly new, and it's located pretty close to a few businesses. Many nights I go on walks when the weather is good, because there's a sidewalk that goes around my apartment complex. It also goes past several of the businesses and along a few streets as well. It's a nice and easy route to walk, and I prefer that over going on a treadmill. So one night I went for a walk a little bit later than usual at around 9 p.m. It was a nice night though, and the weather was good. I had worked late and wanted to get some fresh air and exercise, so I started walking, and basically the route that I took went past the apartment complex. Then I would cross the street, go past a few businesses, and then turn at the corner and walk another way that went back around the complex. It was a loop that would take about 15 minutes to walk, and I would usually walk 2 or 3 laps of it. On this night, things were very quiet with it being a little bit later. Sometimes other people would be out walking their dogs, but I didn't see anyone. So I made it past the apartment complex, and I was walking past some businesses. One of those was a Chipotle. I remember looking over as I went past, and I saw this man walking out of it. He seemed to look over at me, but he was really far away, well over 100 feet. I just looked away and kept walking. I continued with my walk and eventually turned and went along the street. I made it back around to my apartment a while later and then decided to walk another lap, maybe 2. So I continued on, and eventually I was walking past the Chipotle again. When I did, I noticed that the man who I had seen was still there. This was pretty strange. It was like 15 or 20 minutes later, but the guy looked like he had barely moved 5 feet. He was just standing around next to the building and appeared to be looking right at me. I looked at him for a moment and then continued. The man then seemed to start walking in my direction. I just kept going and didn't look back at him. I reached the corner and turned where I usually did, and then started walking along the street. It wasn't until about 5 minutes later that I looked behind me. When I did, I noticed that the man was there walking a pretty far ways back. I found this odd, but I wasn't nervous or anything yet. I kept going, and after turning another corner, I looked behind me once again. After a short time, I saw the man come around the corner. He was still walking behind me. I told myself that it was just a coincidence, and at that point, it very well could have been. I didn't look behind me for a long time, not until I got to my apartment again where I would start and end the walks. There I glanced back, and the man was still there, but still a long ways behind me. I had been planning on doing another lap. I had a sort of bad feeling, like maybe the man was following me. Still, I told myself that I was just being paranoid, and I kept going. So I continued walking, and when I got towards the Chipotle again, the man was still behind me, except now he looked closer than before. Now I knew this was not a coincidence. Why would he leave the Chipotle just to walk around and then go back to it? I started walking faster and told myself not to look back. About 10 minutes later, when I was by the street, I couldn't help myself and I looked. The man was still there and even closer to me than before, even after I had started walking faster. Now I was regretting doing another lap, and I just wanted to get back to my apartment. As I kept walking, I could sense that the guy was getting closer and closer. I continued at my fast pace. I turned at the corner before my apartment and I was nearly running. I didn't look back or anything. Finally, I reached my apartment building. It was not the main door to the place, but a side one. I went inside quickly and made sure that the door shut and locked. Then I started going up the stairs, which were right there. When I got to the second floor, I looked out of the window in the stairwell. I saw the man standing there and trying to open the door, but he couldn't get in, so clearly he didn't live there. When I was looking at him, he looked up and noticed me, and then he started knocking on the door. I ignored it and quickly moved away from the window and went to my apartment. After that, I made sure not to walk at night for a while. I'm not sure what that man wanted or who he was, but it's very strange. For a stretch of about 6 months a long time ago, I worked at a Chick-fil-A. I was a 17-year-old girl at the time and was just about to graduate from high school. So the story really starts one time when I was working on a Saturday. I had started work in the morning and was working until sometime in the afternoon. I don't remember exactly when. But towards the end of my shift, I was working at the front counter taking orders.
I saw this man start to approach me and I greeted him. Instead of ordering right away though, he just started to talk to me. The man asked me how I was doing and how work had gone. At first, I thought he was just being friendly and I was happy to answer his questions, although I did get a sort of bad feeling about him for some reason. The man continued to talk to me though and asked me more questions. He asked when I got off, and I told him that I would be off in just a few minutes. Then he started asking more personal questions. He asked if I had a boyfriend, asked if I lived around there, and he asked if I was in school. By like the 5th question, I was getting kind of weirded out by it and wondering if he was going to order. After talking to the man and answering his questions, giving as little information as possible for like 2 minutes, I asked him what he wanted to order. By now, another man had already entered and got in line behind the first guy. The man then started asking me about the menu like he had never been there before. He asked me what my favorite thing was and what the best sellers were and stuff. He talked to me about the menu for about another minute or two at least. He was asking tons of questions, and by that point somebody else was also waiting in line now, so he was holding them up. The guy was now seeming creepy to me and not just friendly. Some people are very talkative, but they're just friendly. This guy didn't come across that way. Finally, after talking to me about myself and the menu for a total of at least 5 minutes, he ordered. The guy just got a Diet Coke, and that was it. It almost made me wonder why he even came to Chick-fil-A if all he was going to do is order a Diet Coke. So the man got his order pretty quickly, and then I continued with helping the next customers. A line had formed because of the man taking so long. I was kept busy for the next 5 minutes or so taking orders from these people, but at one point I looked up and I saw the guy was still there. He was just standing by the doors drinking his Diet Coke and kind of looking at me. I kept an eye on him and he still hadn't left like 5 minutes later after that. Then I thought that maybe he was waiting for me. I got off in just a few minutes from now and I had told him that. Why else would he just be standing by the doors? It definitely looked like he was waiting for someone. I just hoped that wasn't the case. I kept working until I was finally off a very short time later. I went back and clocked out and stuff. When I went to leave the Chick-fil-A, the man was still standing right by the doors. As soon as I walked out, he turned and started walking out with me. He asked me if I was glad to be off work. I said yes, and then told the man to have a good night, indicating that we were going our separate ways. But the man did not seem happy with that. He asked if I needed a ride home, and I said no thanks, I drove. Then he asked me if I lived around there. I completely ignored his question and just said good night, and it was only like 3 p.m. Then I went to my car and didn't look back. The man thankfully did not follow me to my car or anything. When I had made it inside, I felt very relieved and could not believe how strange that was. Then I started to drive home. But when I did, the guy started to follow me. I never had the idea that he would try to follow me home. I figured he had already left. But when I began driving back, I noticed a car behind me. It was daytime, so I could sort of see pretty good who was behind the wheel, and it was the same man. I just hoped at first that it was a coincidence, but the closer I got to my house, he was still behind me. I lived in a very large neighborhood. There were tons of streets with many houses on each of them. It was a neighborhood that was easy to get lost in if you had never been there before. So when I entered the neighborhood, I did not go to my house, but just started driving around instead. I kept randomly turning and going up and down just about every street. The man stayed with me for probably the first 5 minutes or so. Then he eventually turned off and left me alone. After that, I finally went to my house and was very careful to make sure that I didn't see the guy and he was not following me. I think that the man must have realized that I knew he was following me and that I wasn't going to actually go to my house, so he gave up. That was pretty crazy looking back. I'm just thankful that I never saw him for the rest of my time working at Chick-fil-A. He was a really creepy guy. I used to work as a delivery driver for Domino's Pizza years ago when I was younger. This is the scariest delivery that I ever had. I remember that I was working late one night, as I often did. Being a Domino's, we were open until midnight every night of the week except for Fridays and Saturdays. On those days, we were open until 2 a.m. So this was a weekend, and it was probably about midnight, and I got a delivery. It had been a busy night to that point, and things had finally begun to slow down just a little bit. I didn't get any second thought and grabbed the order and headed out to my car. The order for this particular customer was 3 large cheese pizzas. They had already paid online, so all I had to do was deliver it and get my tip. I headed out to the address, which was maybe 10 minutes away. I was not familiar with the exact particular area where I was going. When I got out there, I noticed a decent amount of warehouses. It was a quieter part of town and not well lit, and seemed to be a little bit more industrial.
I drove down a couple of back roads and then turned into a parking lot that was between two warehouses. There were no cars there, which was weird. It seemed really quiet over there, and I hadn't seen any sign of anybody. I looked around and found the building that the pizza was to be delivered to. It was mostly a typical looking warehouse. It was large and didn't really have any windows. I took the pizzas, walked over to the door, and then knocked on it. At first, there was nothing. It was eerily quiet around there. Then, finally, the door opened. When it did, I saw that it was literally pitch black inside. The only thing I could see in there was just a few feet directly in front of the door on the ground, and that was only from the little bit of moonlight and outside light being let in. I couldn't see anyone or anything at all, just a small amount of the floor in front of me. I was not sure who had opened the door because they were nowhere in sight. I did not want to enter the building though. After about 5 or 10 seconds though, I heard a voice come from inside. It was a woman's voice and she sounded friendly and casual. She said, "You have the pizza, in here." I was put at ease a little bit upon hearing a friendly voice. I said, "Okay," and started walking inside. I still didn't know why I couldn't see anything though. After going inside, I was now surrounded by darkness and could not see a thing. I didn't know if I was going to bump into someone or something. After taking a few steps, I said, "I can't see anything. Is there a light anywhere?" I was holding the large pizzas with both hands, so I couldn't take out my phone for a flashlight or anything. When I said this though, there was no response. The woman did not speak, and neither did anybody else, if anybody else was there. I assumed there was multiple people for it being a 3 large pizza delivery. That disappointed me that nobody responded. I knew they heard me. Other than that, it was completely silent in there. This was seeming really strange and also sketchy. I slowly took a few more steps in. Then I stopped. I didn't know where on earth I was supposed to go. I said, "Where is everybody?" Still nothing. No response and no answer. After a few seconds of standing there, someone suddenly reached out and grabbed the pizzas from me. As soon as the pizzas were out of my hands, I just turned around and bolted for the door. I ran back and ran into the sidewall right next to the door. Thankfully, the door was still open though, and I reached around and found it. Then I left. I ran all the way back to my car and then drove back to Domino's. Sure, I had not gotten a tip, but I was just happy to get out of there alive. I had never been that creeped out before during a delivery. Thankfully, I never had to deliver there again. Sure, it could have just been people working, and maybe the power went out or something, but why was nobody answering me? I don't know what was going on in there, but it really creeped me out. This happened like 5 years ago when I was on a road trip with my friend at the time, John. I have no plans to ever go on another road trip with that guy again. I don't like driving much, so we made an agreement before where we would take his car and he would drive the entire trip, but I would pay for all the gas. This was a big mistake because John would never stop for food. He only stopped at gas stations and he would only eat candy the entire time. I tried eating all gas station food the first day, but I got tired of it and I wanted something else. I asked John to stop, but he refused and said that he was driving so he could go wherever he wanted. He said if I had a problem with the candy diet, then it's too bad. His dinner for that night was toothpaste candy, which he ended up spilling in the back seat. Anyways, on the second night we'd been driving all day and I was starving. Sometime a little after dark, John stopped for gas and more candy at another gas station. This time though, I saw that there was a Subway not too far away from the gas station within walking distance. I don't really remember where we were. It felt like we were almost in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't much else around aside from the gas station and the Subway. There was just another gas station across the street too, and that was basically it. The Subway was across this other quiet street and sort of down a hill, so it wasn't right next door or anything, but I could see it. After John got gas, which I had to pay for, he went inside to stock up on more toothpaste candy. I decided while he was inside I would walk to the Subway and finally get an actual meal. This Subway was more of an odd-looking one. I know that there's so many Subways around and they're in all types of different buildings. This one was rather small though, and it looked kind of old and outdated. The parking lot was also small, but I figured it would be just fine. A Subway is a Subway. However, when I finally got to the parking lot, I looked inside. About half the lights inside appeared to be off, and it seemed like they might be closed. I'm not sure why, but I tried the door anyways. It opened, and I went inside. But when I got in, I couldn't see anybody around at all. The place was completely empty, and so I figured that they must be closed. After taking a few more steps, I realized that they were in fact closed. And I don't just mean they closed for the night. It looked like the place was not in business at all, because I didn't see any food. As I was standing around inside just looking, I heard somebody coming from the back room area. I didn't know who it would be, so I just turned around to get out of there. I didn't look back, but when I walked out the door, I heard whoever it was go from the back room to behind the counter. When I had made it outside, I looked over through the window, and I saw this guy standing inside behind the counter and looking at me. I couldn't tell much of what he looked like, but I just decided to keep going. I walked back up the hill and across the grass area to get to the gas station parking lot again. As I was doing this, I heard a door open and close a ways back. I looked over and saw a man now walking around the subway. It was the same guy who I had seen. The man was wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt with the hood up, and he was also wearing black sweatpants. I looked away again and made it the rest of the way up to the gas station parking lot. There I looked back and I saw the man was still walking towards me. He was a ways up the hill now. It was perfect timing because John was just walking out of the gas station with a bag filled with candy. I quickly hopped inside of his car, and as soon as John got in, I told him to drive. I looked over and I saw the guy now walking into the gas station parking lot and heading in our direction still. John left, and I saw the guy starting to run in basically the opposite direction now. We drove through that town past the subway sort of to get back to the highway. When we had merged back onto the highway, like maybe 2 or 3 minutes later, a car pulled up behind us. It started tailing us pretty close, which was saying something because John was going at least 10 over. He even moved over to let the car by, but it did not pass us. It just stayed right on our tail. That's when I thought that maybe it was the guy from the subway. We kept driving, and no matter if John changed lanes or slowed down, the car remained right behind us. I couldn't tell who was behind the wheel though because it was too dark out to see. The car kept following us for a good 20 minutes or so. Then finally it stopped. I don't know what prompted it to stop, but it just randomly turned off at an exit. Then we kept going with the trip. Looking back, I'm not sure what was going on there. Was that guy breaking into the subway or up to something sketchy and that's why he followed me? Was he just the subway owner and mad at me because I walked in after close? Maybe the car following us wasn't even that same guy and I'm just paranoid. I really think that it was though, but I'll never know for sure I guess. That made for a very interesting moment from the road trip though. Many years ago, I got a job as a waitress at the small restaurant. It was basically like a diner because we would be open for 24 hours and I had to start out working overnight shifts. I had worked an overnight job in the past, so it was not a huge adjustment for my routine. And this was the only job that I could find at that particular time. So on my very first night working, things started out pretty well. It was very quiet, but we did get a few customers here and there. I was the only waitress to work on the overnight hours because of it typically being quiet then. Our restaurant was located kind of out in the country and not really near anything else other than a gas station, but there was a very large highway real close by. I served a few customers and things went smooth. I had some experience as a waitress, which helped. Then I remember at almost 2 o'clock in the morning, this one man entered. He sat down in the corner and was alone. He was a large man and had a beard and wore a trucker hat. I went up and introduced myself and asked what he wanted to drink like I always did. He got a coffee and then later ordered food. The guy seemed pretty average to me, like many of the overnight customers that we had. Sort of quiet, but overall nice. Nothing was weird about it until the end. When it came time for the check, he told me that he had forgot his wallet in his car and he was sorry. He seemed genuinely sorry about it and like it was a mistake, and I didn't think he was lying. The guy said that he would go get it real fast. I remember he even said that he could leave his hat and shoes to prove that he was coming back. But then he stopped himself and said that I could come out with him to show that he wasn't lying. I told him, no, it's okay, I believe you. Go ahead and get your wallet. But the man insisted. He said, no, I want you to come with me and see that I'm not a liar. Then he added, don't worry, I'll give you a nice tip for the trouble. He grabbed the check and then kind of took my hand and led me to the door. In that moment he was being really friendly, so I decided that I would go outside to his car with him to make it easier. That way he could just pay me there and then not have to walk back in the restaurant. So I followed the guy outside. Now, outside the restaurant was not well lit at all with it being out in the country, and the parking lot was mainly out front, but then it wrapped around the side of the building and went around back a little bit as well. The parking lot would actually be full during the dinner hours, but now it was almost completely empty. For some reason though, the man had not parked out front, but instead he parked behind the building. I followed him around to the back part where it was even darker. I saw his pickup truck. When we approached it, he suddenly grabbed my arm and began pulling me to the car. I asked him what he was doing and he told me to be quiet. I tried to pull away from him, but he was much stronger and pulled me faster to his truck. I started to yell, but then he covered my mouth. There was nothing that I could do to overpower him. We were struggling, but overall he was getting me closer and closer to his truck. He got to the point where he was able to open the door. Just then, I heard something a ways back. The back door to the restaurant opened, and I saw our cook. Now, I don't know if he heard me yell or if he just happened to be going out back, but when he saw what was going on, he started yelling at the guy and came running over. This gave the guy basically no choice but to let me go. He quickly got into his truck and then drove away. The cook came up and asked if I was alright, and I was. He then called the cops. Unfortunately, we did not get the guy's license plate or really any information about him other than his description, and he left without paying too. I don't know if he was ever caught, but I'm really hoping that he was.
I used to be a manager at this one restaurant. It was not a very large restaurant, but it was pretty nice. We would be busy most of the time, and we did not have that many employees. One time I was working on Valentine's Day. This was a very busy night for us because all the people going on Valentine's dates. For most of the night, I was busy doing many different things. There were lots of customers inside the whole time. We closed at 10 o'clock at night, and people were there right until then. After most of the customers had left, some employees had left as well, and it was a little after 10 o'clock. We had locked the doors, and we were now doing some cleaning and other tasks. I was still there running around and doing different stuff. I remember that I went out into the dining room area, and I saw a ways away there was a man inside near the front doors. He seemed to be walking in the direction of them. He was not an employee, and I was not aware that any customers had still been inside. It looked like he was walking to the doors to leave though, so I just kept going and was soon in another area. Several more of the staff members soon went home, and then it was just me and a few other people. I remember that I went out into the dining room to finish up some cleaning. I was back near a corner booth, and that's when I saw him. The same guy was crouched down, hiding underneath the table of the booth. It was in the very corner of the restaurant, and I jumped back after noticing him. It was such a shock. The guy was still there, and after a moment, I told him that he had to leave now. I really didn't know what he was planning to do, but I just hoped that he would leave. At first, he did nothing. Then I said it again. Finally, the man got up and left his hiding place under the table. He walked over to the front doors and then left. Another coworker saw the guy and asked me what had just happened. I told him about it, and we were just glad that the man was now gone, and we went back to work after that. So we finished up, and after about 30 minutes, I was the last one there. Then I finally left. When I was outside and in the parking lot, I started heading to my car. As I was doing so, I noticed the man again. He was standing at the backside of the parking lot by himself. I hurried up and started walking faster to my car. That's when I noticed the man starting to walk in my direction. I literally started running and was able to make it to my car in plenty of time. Then I got in and drove away. The man never got to my car, and after that experience, I thankfully never saw him again. This happened almost a year ago now. It's something that's still given me PTSD, and I'm currently on anxiety medication for it. I grew up in a small town. I was determined to get out of there from a young age. At age 15, I started working at one of the 2 local pizza places. By age 16, I was able to afford a car, a beat-up one, but it allowed me to get on the road and make deliveries, which meant more money. I had previously been robbed during a pizza delivery at a Super Bowl party once. I was held at knife point and had to forfeit all my pizza as well as my cash. This, oddly enough, didn't bug me all that much. I don't know why. To this day, I barely even talk about it, but after that incident, I took to carrying a can of pepper spray. It was late at night, almost closing time one shift, which was 1 a.m. We had gotten a call to deliver 3 pizzas to the next town over, which is a place that is out of our delivery range, but sometimes there were circumstances that would allow us to. The circumstances were that out of all delivery drivers, as well as the assistant manager at the time, there were a few that were peddling drugs. A customer would have to ask for a very specific order, specific sizes, specific toppings, and a certain order. No exceptions. It was a service policy for one of those specific drivers to make this delivery, even if it was outside our range. I was never one of them, but on this night, I was. I knew the trick of the trade, so when I saw the garlic bread bag on top of the more specific pizza orders, I knew it was a drug order.
My assistant manager at the time even specifically instructed me to get the envelope from the customer and that he was sure they would tip well. I didn't want to conduct this. My hands were sort of tied though, as the usual drug delivery drivers were already out. I just wanted to finish my shift, so I took off with haste. It took me about 30 minutes to get to the location. It was in a very sparsely populated neighborhood. I went to the door and was greeted by a girl. I went to school with her a while ago, so that put me at ease a little bit. But she had changed a lot. She was pretty at one point and super outgoing. Now she looked like she had developed a drug problem, which isn't incredibly uncommon in my town. She greeted me with a smile and accepted the pizzas. Then, out of the darkness, my arms were restrained behind my back, and mere seconds later I found the barrel of a revolver placed against my head. I instantly pleaded for my life, which seemed to only amuse them. Then the one with the gun demanded my wallet. I saw no point in arguing and told him where he could find it. When I didn't have enough money in it, he demanded my work money. For a little more context, pizza places will typically tell you that their drivers don't carry more than $20 in change. This is a lie. This is mostly said so it doesn't seem like we're carrying more money in case of a robbery situation, but my robbers seem to know this. The guy with the gun hit me in the face when I didn't produce the rest of the money. I usually left this in my car, and he didn't accept my explanation. At that point, I was forced into the house. I screamed for help, but it was accomplishing absolutely nothing. The guy that was holding me threw me on the couch, and the girl had closed the door. I explained to them that I wasn't aware of any policy, and if they had an issue to please take it up with my assistant manager. The guy with the gun, who was clearly under the influence, asked for one driver specifically. He asked why he didn't show up. I told him he was making other deliveries. It took everything in me not to cry at this time. After asking me some other questions that I couldn't answer, he put the gun to my head and pulled the hammer back. He then instructed me to call the other driver and have him present himself. I slowly complied, but instead of grabbing my phone, I grabbed my pepper spray. It felt stupid, but I saw a brief opportunity to get out of there. I elbowed the pistol out of my face and then sprayed the canister onto his. I didn't take any chances. I sprayed him in the eyes, nose, and inside of his mouth. The smell of that stuff still irritates my sinuses when I think about it. Now, I've been in exactly 3 fights in my life before this, and I lost all 3 times. But after spraying him, I hit him in the crotch and then slammed my fist down on his face. We wrestled for the pistol for a few seconds. I managed to get it on the floor and grabbed it away. The other guy took a few steps towards me, but then backed up once he saw I had the gun. Once he saw that I had the gun in my hand, he backed off and asked me to leave. I'm not a violent person in the slightest, but I'll admit I still get joy out of the look on his face when he saw me holding the gun. I was on cloud 9 for a few minutes as I drove away, but once I got a healthy distance from the house, I pulled my car over and had to take a moment to compose myself. I then realized I was still holding the pistol. Upon further observation, I noticed that it only had 1 bullet in it, and it wasn't the chambered one. He could have pulled the trigger about 4 times before I got killed. He probably was going to use that as a tactic to scare me if I didn't do what he wanted. When I got back to the restaurant, my manager and I got into a heated argument over what happened at the delivery. I wasn't having that after what I went through, so I just left the store early. I couldn't really call the cops at all because I had been part of the drug deal and had agreed to do it, so I didn't think that would be smart. When I got home, I told my stepdad about what happened though. He later went to go find my manager about it. I don't know what happened, but when I got to work on Monday, I clocked in with no issues. I worked there for about another month. Then I decided I'd rather work somewhere else where I wasn't treated poorly and putting my life in danger. For a period of time a long time ago, I used to work at McDonald's as a manager. I worked there for about a year and dealt with some crazy things, but one time is by far the craziest thing to ever happen there. It was an average evening for the most part. We got somewhat busy and I was helping with different tasks. At our McDonald's, we never had enough employees and were seemingly always short, so I did a little bit of everything. At one point though, I was in the back for a while, but I heard that someone was asking for me. Apparently there was a dispute with a customer and he asked for the manager. So I walked up to the counter and saw one of my employees looking upset and an angry man on the other side of the counter. I didn't hear any of the conversation, but I knew the employee he was dealing with was very nice. The man asked me if I was the manager and I said yes. He then told me how he was mad because the fries were cold, but he went on to insult my employee and call her stupid. He did not seem interested in resolving the matter, only in letting out his anger towards us. After he started swearing towards us employees, I yelled at the guy and told him to get out. I said we weren't doing anything, and if he didn't leave now, I would ban him and call the cops. He continued to yell at us, and literally everybody else in the restaurant was staring at the scene. Eventually, though, the guy finally walked out and left. I was glad that I didn't have to call the police on him. Then we resumed back to normal for the most part. Eventually, within about an hour, we all moved on and were feeling better. As it got later, things quieted down. I remember that at one point, I went to take out the trash. We had dumpsters in an area behind the building. So I walked over to a back door and put a few trash bags in the dumpster. As I did, I saw past the few trees next to the dumpster into the very back corner of the parking lot. There was the man standing in the shadows. He saw me and instantly started to walk over. I didn't want to fight the guy, so I just turned around and walked back inside. Those doors automatically locked, but I just hoped that the man wouldn't come back through the main doors. After I got back inside, I stayed near the doors. Within moments, I heard some loud noises from outside. The guy was doing something, but I didn't know what, so I decided to go out and see. So I walked around to the main doors and left the restaurant. I walked over to see the man. He was outside by the dumpsters, and it appeared that he had taken the trash bags out of the dumpsters and messed them all around. He had dumped them out and there was garbage everywhere. I told the man that he had to stop and leave now or I was going to call the police. Once more he started yelling and cursing at me. This guy had to be insane. He had waited for over an hour, as the last altercation was a long time ago, and he apparently was just standing in the parking lot. I kept telling him that he had to go now, but he just wouldn't. So eventually I went back inside and I called the police. I was on a mission to get him banned from our McDonald's forever. I waited inside for the police, and the man did not enter the McDonald's for a while. Then, within about 5 minutes, when I thought the cops would be there any moment, the man walked back inside. This time he walked right over to me. I told him that I already called the cops. He claimed that he didn't care, and he just stood there looking at me. I didn't know what he wanted now. I just hoped that he didn't want to fight me or something like that. I stood there and he stared at me. It was like we were having a standoff. Then, finally, the cops got there. When they did, the man tried to run for the other exit. The police told him to come back, but when he didn't listen to orders, they ran after him. The man ran out into the parking lot and apparently went around the building. Eventually, he was caught by the cops. The man ended up having several illegal drugs on him and was arrested. He was also banned from our McDonald's forever, and I haven't seen him since. This is something that happened a couple of years ago, but I still think about it sometimes. One day, several of my friends and I were getting together. It was a group of 7 of us women in total, and we went to a restaurant in town for brunch. We live in a village that has a very nice downtown area where you can walk all around. It has parks and several roads, but it doesn't get that bad of traffic. There are lots of nice shops, restaurants, and bars, and it has a very relaxing feel to it. My friends and I go there all the time. On this day, we all went to the restaurant. I remember that it was really busy as lots of other people go there. My friends and I were there for a while, and we were sitting at this large table that was in the patio area outside in the corner. I brought my instant camera to take a group picture of us, and I did. We were at the restaurant for over an hour, and then we all left together. We walked as a group through town and went to this bar on the other side just for a drink. We hung out there for a while and talked some more, and after that we left. After walking back through the town, we went our separate ways and went back home. Now, it wasn't until the next day that I realized I did not have my camera. I concluded that I must have left it at the restaurant and forgot it there, because I did not know where else it would be. I remember that I called the restaurant and asked if anybody had found it. The camera had a small case that it was in, and I did not have that either. However, when I called, I was told they did not have it. So either I thought nobody had found it or somebody had took it. I was trying to retrace my steps and think about where it could be, but I was sure that I didn't have it after the restaurant. I called the bar that we were at too, just to be safe, and they didn't have it either. I was disappointed, but I guess it wasn't a huge deal. I could always get another camera. However, only about an hour later, I got a call back from the first restaurant. They said that they did have the camera after all, and that it had been recently turned in. So I left and went down there and picked it up. After I got my camera back, it was in its case, and when I got back home, I looked inside. When I did, something was strange. The camera was in there, but so were a bunch of loose photos. I looked at them, and there were all these pictures of a creepy-looking clown. They were taken at night in what looked like a dark room. This person had their face fully painted as a clown and were wearing a wig. The photos were quite scary looking to me if I'm being honest, and there were like 10 of them, all pretty similar. Then there were a few other photos. There was a couple taken outside during the daytime on the street of what looked like the downtown area of the village, and then I realized that they were taken of me and my friends as we were walking down the sidewalk. We were off in the distance, not super close, but visible, and whoever took the photo was walking a long ways back. And then the last photo in the pile of them was the one that I took with my friends. I was really creeped out after seeing this. I called back the restaurant and asked them where they found the camera if they knew. I was told that a man had brought it up to the counter and said that he found it. I'm guessing that was the guy who the clown was who took the photos. This may have been his idea of a funny prank, but I found it really creepy, especially the fact that he found my camera and didn't give it back to me at first. Instead, he followed us, took our pictures, and then took a bunch of creepy clown pictures. Then he gave it back. I obviously haven't seen any creepy clowns since then, but I still remember that sometimes. This happened last Valentine's Day. I was on a date with my girlfriend. With it being Valentine's, we went to a restaurant that was pretty nice. The whole night was planned. We were going out to eat, and then we were going to go back to my apartment and watch a movie. After getting to the restaurant where we had reservations, we were seated at a table by the wall. I was sitting against the wall facing the rest of the place, and my girlfriend was facing me. I could see that the restaurant was pretty crowded on this night. Soon we ordered, and things were going well. Almost an hour in, after we had been there for a while and were almost done, the waiter came over to our table. He had a bottle of wine, which we did not order, and he put it on the table. He said that the man on the other side of the restaurant had ordered it for us. He indicated which person it was. I looked over, and there was a man who was sitting up against another wall by himself in a booth. He looked sort of mysterious for some reason. The guy was all alone, did not have any food but just what appeared to be a drink. He wore a dark jacket and looked over at me when I saw him. I gave him a small wave to say thanks, but the guy didn't do anything. He just looked back down and then took a drink. We said thanks and took the wine, but we only had a little bit. I'm not a huge drinker, and I had to drive home as well. So we were obviously wondering why the guy had ordered us the wine. We didn't know him at all. Maybe he just wanted to be nice, but why us? There were a lot of other people there. The next time our waiter came back, I wanted to return the favor, so I told him to give the guy a Budweiser from me. My girlfriend and I talked for a while, and we ended up staying longer than anticipated, because we probably stayed another 20 minutes. We just got carried away in our conversation and were having a good time. In that time, I didn't look over at the man much, but when I did, he was still there, just looking down and drinking by himself. I figured that when we left, I would go over and say thanks to him in person. Perhaps he was a lonely guy out on Valentine's Day, or maybe he was divorced or something. So after we paid and whatnot, we got up to leave. However, as soon as we stood up, I saw the man stand up and instantly walk out of the restaurant. There was no chance for me to talk to him because he was sitting closer to the doors than we were, so he was able to leave way before us. We just left after that, and I didn't see the guy out in the parking lot or anything. That is, until we got to the car. After getting inside, I was getting ready to drive away when I looked in the mirror and I noticed the man. We were parked on the end of the parking lot next to the grass, and the man was parked in a row behind us and a spot to the left, but his car was backed into the space. So in my mirror, I saw the man sitting in his car and it was still parked. I didn't leave yet and pointed him out to my girlfriend. We were still wondering what he was doing. Like I said, the guy just seemed kind of mysterious and even borderline suspicious. But he had done a nice thing for us by getting us a bottle of wine, so I was not trying to think anything bad about him. We sat there in the parking lot for a couple more minutes before leaving because my girlfriend had the idea to stop at a gas station or store. I was still kind of hungry, to be honest, because that fancy restaurant didn't give a good amount of food. But we also wanted to get movie snacks for when we got home, so I was looking for a moment to see what was on the way. In that whole time, the man did not leave, but just sat in his car. Then finally, I backed up and left. As soon as I did that, that same instant, I saw the man pull out of the parking space in his car and leave behind us. Right away, I was wondering if that was a coincidence or if he was following us. We drove onto the road, and the man remained behind us. Road after road, for the first 3 turns, he was still there. By now, we were really wondering what he was doing. First he buys us a bottle of wine, now he follows us home, and not a word from the man the entire night. After about 10 minutes of driving, he was still there. Soon I pulled off the road and took another exit to go to a gas station. I parked there, and there were a few other people there, making it feel safe. After parking, the man entered the parking lot in his car, but he did not park next to us. Instead, he parked his car on the other side. I walked into the gas station, and the man stayed inside his car. My girlfriend stayed in my car as well. After being inside the store for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, I left to go back to the car. The man hadn't left his vehicle the entire time, so I decided to confront him. There were other people around, so I didn't think he would try anything. I left my car and walked over to his. He was still sitting inside it. I went over and knocked on his driver's window. He was sitting in there looking straight ahead, not even looking at me. When I knocked, he completely ignored it. I knocked louder and then waved my hands in front of his face in front of his driver's window. The man did not even look at me. He didn't acknowledge me at all. He did nothing. I shouted at him asking why he was following me. He still didn't even look. He just kept sitting there, stone cold. I was fed up. I walked away back to my car, got inside, and told my girlfriend about the crazy encounter. Then we left. And when I did, the man left too. By now, I was angry and confused. After getting back on the road, I instantly pulled over. The man did as well. We both just sat there. Then, after like 30 seconds, surprisingly, he pulled back onto the road and drove away, passing me by. I was amazed that he was gone, but also glad. Then we drove the rest of the way home, and I didn't see the guy at all after that. We had a normal rest of the night, but I obviously was wondering about that guy for a while, and I still am. Why was he being so weird? And why did he just ignore me like that? It makes no sense, but I guess he didn't cause any harm, so that's good.
One night after work, I went to McDonald's. I was very hungry, and every other place was closed. It was after 10 p.m., so the options for food were very slim, at least in the area that I live. I went to the McDonald's closer to my work, but on the way home. I pulled into the parking lot, walked in, and ordered at one of the screens. Then I waited for a little while. There were a couple of other people inside, but not many. I really didn't pay them much attention, though. As I waited for my order, I just went on my phone. Soon enough, my order was called, and I got it and then left. I walked to my car, got in, and started to drive home. When I pulled out onto the road, this truck pulled out from the McDonald's right behind me. Then it started to follow me, and by this point where we were basically the only two cars on the road. I wouldn't have been that suspicious at first, but then the truck turned where I did and it started honking. I hadn't done anything wrong, and I was wondering why the truck was honking at me. I slowed down and moved to the right side of the road. I thought that maybe the truck wanted to pass me, but when I did, he made no attempt to get by. Then he started flashing his brights on and off. Clearly this guy was really trying to get my attention or had a big problem with me. I pulled over to the side of the road completely and stopped. When I did, the truck went forward going past me, but then went right in front of me and stopped. He stopped in a way where he was basically cutting me off and blocking my path. It was really aggressive. Then the driver's door opened and this man walked out. I recognized him and realized that he was one of the people that was inside the McDonald's. I'm not sure how I noticed so fast because I hadn't really paid much attention to the people in there. But nevertheless I did, and he was now walking towards my car. It seemed like the guy was up to no good, and I felt like I needed to get out of there. So as soon as the man quickly approached my driver's door, I put the car into reverse. Then I backed up down the side of the road, and the guy quickly went back over to his truck. I made a U-turn and now started going the opposite way down the road. When I did, the man was able to get back to his truck fast enough and started to follow me again. As I was driving the other way on the road now, he quickly caught back up to me. I wasn't sure where to go, and there was not a whole lot around in the general area. Plus, it was late at night, which did not help the matter. As I drove down that road, I just decided to go back to the McDonald's. It was a public place with other people, so it felt a little bit safer. When I saw it again, I pulled into the parking lot. Then I quickly parked. The man in the truck also drove to the McDonald's and parked. I got out of my car quickly and walked back inside as the truck was parking. When I got into the McDonald's, I realized that the man did not get out of his truck. He was still inside it, waiting for me to leave probably. But I was not going to. I went and sat down in the McDonald's and then just waited. I looked out the window watching the guy's truck. I sat there for probably 20 or 30 minutes. Then, finally, I saw the truck drive away. After it left, I left, and I was able to drive home finally. I made it back safe, but I never found out why that guy was following me. Clearly, he really wanted something with me, but I have no idea what.